You look cute. Put your jacket on. You're gonna be cold.
That's why I brought a sweater.
You're not gonna be cold. Plus, you're sitting next to me.
It's always cold in here.
Back is back.
I'd rather be cold than hot, though.
That is true. The AC does work in this room, doesn't it?
It does. I stole a pen from Murphy and I've lost it. There's another.
Usually I'm sitting behind that desk, swinging my feet, trying to keep myself warm. I'm like, okay, at least moving keeps me a little warmer.
Who are we waiting on? Anybody? Oh, the lovely Mrs. Shamp.
We're Bucks fans. It's always like, probably gonna lose. One of the employees. It's fun to go to the game.
Okay, everybody, you ready? Jason, Sarah? Remember the microphones, please. So we're going to call this meeting to order. It is a joint session of the Town of Fort Myers Beach Town Council and the local planning agency. It is Thursday, September 5th, 2019. Councilman Butcher has an excused absence, and it is 11:17 a.m. We'll be breaking about 1 o'clock for a quick little lunch. And let's all introduce ourselves just so everyone hears your name on the record. I'm Anita Saracita.
Megan Heil.
Joanne Champ.
Tim Smith.
Lori Wolf.
Scott Safford.
Rexanne Hossafrost.
Daniel Hughes.
Jason Green.
Sarah Probst.
Ray Murphy.
So I really appreciate the work that the LPA has done on these issues because they're recurring issues for us and they're extremely important issues for the future. And so, Megan, I'm going to let you kind of start this discussion on changes to the minimum use determination requirement. Give us a little update on how you've been on that, what you're talking about, and then we'll hear from the LPA members, and then if any of the council members have questions, we'll go from there.
Actually, this was a new one brought up, kind of put on the agenda by the town staff. Do you want to give us a quick update on this one as to why you brought it in front of us? This was, and you've been part of every discussion on this because it's today.
Okay, yep, that's not a problem. So currently on the books, we have something called a minimum use determination. The minimum use determination gives people criteria if the lot is non-conforming either by density or by lot size. So the way the code currently works, if the lot is under 4,000 square feet, it's not a minimum lot size. So we have existing lots that are less than 4,000 square feet. Some have homes built on them, others don't. They are platted lots though. We have an issue where people have asked about rebuilding lots or rebuilding homes on these very small lots, and we don't have an avenue to allow them to do that because currently our code says it's not a minimum lot. So that's one of the issues. The other issue is that we have instances where lots have been combined. So they were platted lots, there were two platted lots, somebody purchased both lots, they put a house that may or may not cross onto the adjacent property. If it crosses onto the adjacent property at any point, the minimum use determination does not allow them to be re-separated. So there's an issue where there are lots that meet the minimum lot size. They're large lots, but because a house was once built over them and they may not meet the density. For example, we have a house that currently exists where a portion of it was built over the lot line. It's two lots that are large, but it's in the low density area. The low density area only allows 4 dwelling units per acre. So the two lots, when separated, don't quite meet it, but they were legally existing lots and all of the surrounding lots are that size. So they have to come to us for a minimum use determination and we can't grant it because a structure was built over the lot line. So we're trying to clean up this issue so that lots that should be buildable lots are buildable lots. So when somebody buys something, they know what they're getting. So we have two options that resolve. One resolves part of the issue, the other completely resolves the issue regarding the smaller lots.
Back to the 4,000 square foot lot and not an avenue. didn't we just recently, in the past 6, 8 months, have a case in front of us, which the resolution came through us, and we were able to resolve that on a case-by-case basis? Does it really need to be defined in here, or can it still be handled in the LPA?
The way that one was handled, I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked.
It was,
I believe it met the density. So the issue is, if it doesn't meet the density or the minimum lot size, there's nothing that can be done. Or if a structure's built over it, there's nothing that can be done, because the code just doesn't allow an avenue for that. So, and many of the instances that we're looking at, they're along the northern part of Estero Boulevard. It was a single lot that was divided into 6 small lots, with an individual home on each one. The issue really is, do we want each of them to have to hire an attorney and go through the process to argue for something that in most communities would be permitted, and they can build a home there? It's, it was foreseen that there would be a home there, but then when the code was written, it doesn't allow it.
Dan, I'm going to go straight to you because this was such a topic. So go ahead, share with us your thoughts.
Like deja vu all
It
over
is
again.
deja vu.
I remember discussing this when we drafted these, and appeared before the LPA on the council to try to clarify some of the issues. Going to example 2 first, I would just make the general comment that if the lot, the under 4,000 square feet lot, was subdivided and was a legal lot at the time it was subdivided, I don't think it, in my view, it doesn't make much difference for the attorney. I don't think we can prevent them from building on that lot as a matter of law. If they did not own any contiguous lots and it was subdivided at the time. So I don't think we can do anything in our land development code that could preclude them from building on a lot that was legally subdivided and then later became downsized because we became incorporated and created lot size that made them non-conforming.
What do you think on that, Sharon? Sarah, Jason?
Well, I mean, that's specifically what this code section says it applies to whenever it's become non-conforming. And so I agree that I don't think that we should be preventing them, but this section of code was actually written so that if it has become non-conforming, this is how you amend that issue or address that issue. And in a lot of instances, it just doesn't address it properly. If it was under 4,000 square feet, there's just no out in the code, and I don't think that's appropriate.
I agree. It's not appropriate. Jane, you were there too. Jason, you want to say something else?
I just want to piggyback. I mean, Sarah's right. Most of the communities we deal with, if you have frontage on a paved road, if it's a public road, it's a platted lot. And again, there's some paper plats, unrecorded plats. I don't think we're talking about those. We're talking about lot 7 of such and such block. Those ones, most communities recognize those as legally recorded lots prior to a date, and you're good to go. And then you deal with the setbacks, you deal with the other development issues separately. And again, the comp plan part is what prevents the variance if it doesn't meet the density. A lot of communities exempt those from the density requirement, as we do in other circumstances if you were pre-existing prior to our comp plan and our code. So that legal part is what kind of makes us pull our hair out on this, like, why are we not allowing lots that were platted legally there because the corner of a deck happened to cross over a line? That's really what some of that trigger is.
Jane?
This really helps me with the pre-disaster build back going away here in the future, is that those properties that were on small properties, I brought a property to you before and said, how can these people rebuild if you take away the pre-disaster build back, because they won't even be able to put back what they have based on the setbacks that don't fit anymore. And he said they just can't. And I said, it's a lot of record. How can it not be rebuildable if something should blow it away? Or if they can't come back with the pre-disaster build back and put the exact same footprint, but that isn't even a requirement of the pre-disaster build back anymore. So it really was frustrating for me to go back to these people and say, unless you can do it right now before they do something else and take away the pre-disaster build back, you're not gonna have a house there.
Who's talking about taking away the pre-disaster build back?
Well,
But, well, you
it,
did,
it,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, changes to it, right? changes
Okay.
to it.
So, Dan, do you disagree with anything Jane said?
No.
Uh-huh. Justin, or Jason, why do I keep wanting to call you Justin today?
Well, I'm not sure what, Jane,
Well, my thing was, this property is a very small property. They have a house that's been there for 70, 80 years, and they want to rebuild. But because their lot is so small, and if they can't afford to do it right yet, with the pre-disaster build back going away when? At the end of the year?
Well, revisions are being worked on, yes.
Okay, that their property would become non-buildable. And that concerned me, but this says that every buildable lot of record can be built on, but will they have to meet all the setbacks? Is my question, if their house doesn't meet it now and they wanna tear it down, is there a way to at least be able to put back the footprint?
Joanne, you have a comment on that?
I don't think that, that's a separate issue as to whether they would have to
Yeah.
meet the
I
setback.
agree, but it would be a
It-
teensy tiny house.
And the fact that it may be buildable doesn't necessarily mean if they're non-conforming, it doesn't give them a variation on the setbacks.
It's a buildable lot of record.
But they could seek a variation for the setback.
But just because it's a buildable lot doesn't give them a variance to the
Exactly.
setbacks.
Exactly.
We're
And-
not trying to address
Yeah.
1,200 versus
Yeah.
1,700 square feet. I think
Mhm.
that's dictated by the setbacks and development standards. We're just trying to recognize that both platted lots that somebody could argue has a legal right to
Mhm.
build on. But secondly, I think more importantly, is one that has a home on it. And ultimately, if eventually these homes are gonna age, and if it needs repair, needs replacement, to tell them no, I think that's where where a storm comes through. Jane's right, the pre-disaster build back generally deals with multiple units, right? There's not a avenue for a single unit to have that relief if if it violates the density, so to speak, today's density. This is that avenue. If it's a single unit, to be able to fix this mud, they could have, I think it was 3,900 square feet. I mean, there's some that are really close to this 4,000. We don't know why that, you guys would know better than we do, but why that 4,000 was picked. It doesn't make a lot of sense to us if it was legally platted.
Joanne, you have a comment on this?
No, conversation's good, and I like what's going on.
Now,
I
I
have one
wanna
question.
point out that the language is included, to make sure that we're not going to allow opportunities for the subdivision of land and then somebody to claim that they had a lot that they could build on. And it's very specific. It's landlocked parcels that are landlocked today. You can't go ahead and create access to those. Then that would open the door for them to be developed on. These are legitimate lots that have road frontage, that have access to them. They're similar to all the other lots in their neighborhood now. Those would be the ones that would benefit from this.
Mm-hmm.
So I know
How
that
many
there's-
lots like this exist on the island?
There's probably a couple hundred, I don't know, a couple hundred.
In looking at this, I found over a dozen just looking, like just basically scanning sections of the island where I know that a lot of these do exist, and just clicking on them to check the size of them. So I found over a dozen of them just in a scan of the island. We didn't do a GIS review of it.
There's an entire neighborhood, the one that you were talking about where we did the variance, that entire neighborhood is less than 4,000 square foot lots.
Yep.
So there's plats, there's full blocks of platted lots that have this issue.
This may be totally off the wall, but it just occurred to me, and didn't occur to me till this moment. In the comp plan for the stuff for Red Coconut, is there anything here that relates to that we need to look at? How little are those lots?
But that has its whole
It has
own
its own
section.
whole own thing,
but-
That's a
but
whole
it
nother-
just,
That's a
I
whole
just,
nother
I
answer.
know,
good
but I
question.
just didn't look at it, and I just
Right.
thought I would have
Red
looked at it if I
Coconut's
thought
an
of it.
interesting concept because that requires that entire
Yes.
area to be
CBD.
redeveloped.
Sure.
We'll have to, that may be a topic
Right.
for us
Or-
to discuss later on because of the complexity of taking all that down and redeveloping that
Right.
at once. But yeah, that has to be redeveloped.
Let me just go to Mr. Herron for a second.
Yeah, well, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think, and I apologize because I was out when the discussion originally started, but there's a distinction, I believe, that can be made between lots of record that are not built versus, I think, what the primary purpose of the discussion is of those lots that are currently substandard, under your existing comprehensive plan and land development regulations as to density and things like that, and the right to rebuild post-disaster. The law in Florida is that a lot of record that has not been built upon does not have a vested right to build at whatever the regulations were when it was originally platted. It has to comply with the current regulations. One way to deal with that, particularly as it relates to density, is obviously TDRs, transfer development rights, that you can, bring in extra density to meet the minimum density requirements. And
Everybody get that? That's, okay, keep going.
with respect to, I think, the majority of the conversation, the focus of the conversation, I have worked in a number of communities that face similar issues to Fort Myers Beach, in that they're older and have some of these smaller lots. And what some of those jurisdictions have done, particularly as it relates to their comprehensive plan and then carry through into the land development regulations, is give the right to rebuild, subject to meeting the new regulations. And I'll use the language in one particular jurisdiction, to the extent practicable. So when they come in for redevelopment post-disaster, staff has an opportunity to take a look at things like, for example, probably weren't addressed or dealt with when the structure was originally built, and the biggest issue is stormwater. Most of the homes, the older homes, probably didn't include a stormwater plan because it wasn't required at the time that they were originally built, if they're older than 30 years or so. Staff then have an opportunity to look at those issues and say, well, here's the to the extent the MUD is, here's the minimum development envelope that you can that you have, and still have the right to rebuild.
Okay, hold that thought for a second. Jason and Sarah, this notion of reasonably, what did you say?
To the extent practicable.
So how does to the extent practical relate to Jane's post-disaster or pre-disaster build back, and if whether in fact a 4,000 square foot lot is buildable with our current setbacks?
Can I just interrupt?
Sure.
What we're trying to do is get these people so they can get to a place in time where Jason and Sarah or whoever comes after them, and this LPA or whoever comes after them, and this council, whoever comes after them, to be able to appear before you and tell you how and why they should be allowed to build. So what we're trying to do is right now, the answer is a hard no, and what we're trying to do is create a scenario where they can come before you to make that case, whether they should be given their old variances or allowed to be built back to their prior footprint. So we're trying to get them in the batter's box so that they can pitch you what they want to do and you can review that. So I just want to make sure the focus of the item is correct.
I mean, the extent practical is whatever you end up defining as the code regulations for it. For example, you give relief to non-conforming lots now with a setback change, 10%. Or 5 feet or whatever that number is. You've defined that essentially as the extent practical by that. You can do that. We've offered some changes to that, and also as moving forward with these other discussions with height and all that, we've offered changes to that related to setbacks. So that's your 40% still would apply of lot coverage. It's a percentage, right? So the smaller the lot, the smaller the building. That's a judgment call for you all to make if you want to allow a 3,800 square foot lot to have the same amount of square footage of buildable as a 7,000 square foot lot. I don't think you do. I think you want it to be scaled to the lot. Because again, a lot of these, I wish I had Mr. Herron with me when I was dealing with some of the rural communities or the platted lot communities. You got Cape Coral, Port Charlotte, Northport. There's over 350,000 platted lots that are unbuilt in those communities between those three. There's another, 70,000 in DeSoto County.
Will they be
all
on
along
or
the
off
river.
of sewer?
They're not on anything. There's no roads, there's no nothing. They struggle with,
amazing,
what do I
isn't it?
do with these lots? I think in those cases, he's exactly right. You don't have to give development rights to them, and they struggle with whether to do that or not. Here, you're a little bit more, it's more of an urban environment. You're talking about a lot that's in the middle of a block that's built out. And so I think, yes, you could say, separate those two. That's an option. I think you run into a vacant lot sitting in the middle of a block here in that case. It's, again, it's not a ton of them, but it's the ones that want to build in its areas that are being built. That's what we want to allow that development to occur, finish that block out, and have it make sense, and make it as easy as possible related to our codes. The setbacks, I think, are a separate conversation, of how much you allow within that smaller lot.
So do I, and this was just, and I'm not hijacking, but are we all kind of on the same page that they should be able to build, if they've got a house, they can come back, but maybe not to what they have today, but they have to start conforming into our code and go through the variance process
And honestly, we've been
from
very,
there, but they get a chance.
we've been nervous about this discussion because I think the mud, when we got here, the mud was such a, I don't know, it was such a coveted, protected thing, and I don't think anybody really knew exactly the intricacies of it. Because there's some things in here that really we can't figure out. It makes no sense. So that's why we're hoping this conversation, when we eventually got the nerve to bring it to you, I think, is, what are the pitfalls? What were the discussions before? Why, is there something we're missing of why this was set this way? And we don't see it. So that's why we're asking for that input. And if it
Roxanne?
wasn't,
Go ahead, sorry, Jason, go ahead.
no, that's right. That was it.
She was just leaning in,
I'm leaning in because I have another idea to throw into the pot here. We're
Sure.
talking about these tiny lots. We have no provision for tiny homes on Fort Myers Beach. Is this the appropriate place that we should be inserting that? We have a problem with there's not enough housing for people that can't afford to live and work on the beach. And if we have these tiny lots that we're going to say you can build stuff on, do we want to make a provision that that's the appropriate place to put a tiny home? Does everybody know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
I do know what you're talking about, but most of the ones that I have seen are movable, and we certainly wouldn't want to encourage that.
No, that's what I'm saying, but this would be the time then that we would put in a provision that says you could build something like a tiny home, but it would have to be attached to the.
Well, I'm not sure that you need to put the provision in. I mean, I think the terminology of saying that it's scaled to the lot creates that situation. I mean, if you're talking about a mobile home, we don't allow mobile homes, and I don't think we want to cross that. Because, when I watch HGTV, the tiny homes they move them.
Yes, but there's also
Or they
communities-
have them at Red Coconut where they're skirted, but we all know the wheels are underneath there. And I'm just speaking for me, I don't have an interest in going that way. If I had a house in a nice neighborhood and then I was going to have a trailer home next to me, I would not be glad that we changed the code in that direction. But I do agree that the
That's not what I
scale-
was talking
Oh,
about.
I'm not ta-
Everybody's taking off.
But scale
the
to,
point
are you
on
talking
that-
about scale to the lot, which is what we're talking
Can
about,
we answer
10%
the question?
setbacks and 40% coverage?
A tiny home can be anything, under 700 square feet is technically termed a tiny house or something now in the,
So
definition of
this
it.
code does not have a minimum size for square footage. The building code has it based on, basically there's, and Robert can correct me later on, but essentially a bathroom, a living space, and a kitchen. All right, that's essentially a living unit. There's a square footage because I'm dealing with a tiny home community somewhere else, frankly. And generally that's a plot of land and they want to create a community for it. You can build essentially a 300 square foot home on a lot here today. I would guess you would meet the setbacks that we're trying to implement, and it wouldn't be an issue. So there's no restriction on.
But by
allowing it.
actually mentioning it in our code and maybe linking it to this section, it would let people know that there is something they could do. And
Right, there is no minimum. Some communities have a minimum 700, minimum 500, whatever it is. We don't have that minimum here. So
but we do have regulations that your bathroom has to be at least this big.
no.
By the time you put in a toilet and a sink and they have to be this far apart.
For the building
Well, residential has that for the building code, and it equals
Right.
about 220 square feet.
Right.
Total.
So I'm just thinking that,
I got you.
I made my
Well,
point. I'm not
yes.
gonna belabor
and I
it.
think the other fear with tiny homes is, and our density would cover a lot of that, our density rules would stop people from having flat out full community, you're not gonna get 6 tiny houses on a single lot because our density takes care of
Right.
that, which is a huge fear with tiny homes, is you all of a sudden got a lot and there's 6 of them. I think our density would take care of that, our density calculations would take care of that as well, so, I'm not against tiny houses, kinda like them, 'cause they have a
Imagine
lot
how
of,
cute they'd look at the
their
end of
charm.
Pearl Street.
yeah, they have a
At the
lot
end
of
Pearl
charm.
Street where there's the.
It is an
Kids Park.
unaddressed issue in this code related to a development of a piece of property for that type of project, absolutely. And it's something we can look at, because of, depending on the square, like, there's a lot of them floating around in other states that are 170, 180 square feet. They don't meet our Florida building code. That's where people keep showing pictures of California and Washington and Michigan and all these tiny home projects. They don't meet our codes. So that's somewhat of a difference. But we can address some of that, I think, a little bit separately.
So could you just give me a real example, get your calculator out real quick. If we had a 4,000 foot square lot and that house meets our setbacks and they didn't want to build a tower, cause I'm seeing we're gonna start having brownstone homes, which, you know, is a whole other issue. How big is that house? And Jane, how much does that lot, just to throw something else in, I'm not gonna ask you that because it's irrelevant. How big is that house?
32 by 65, almost.
Something close to that, maybe 50. 4,000 square foot lot is 1,600 square feet of buildable area because you have
Okay.
you have a 40% building coverage.
Oh, that's right, 40%.
Right. So does that fit every lot with the setbacks? No. Some lots are gonna be a little bit longer, a little bit wider.
Okay,
So, I think, you were right on, we're right in that 30 by, if you say a 45-foot lot, 7.5 foot side yard setbacks, you're in the 30s by 40. You're 12 to 1,600 square feet on a ground floor.
so
Well,
it
I
certainly
shouldn't say
doesn't
on a
match the
second
trend
floor.
of what's being built right now, but it does match the community character.
You could be over 3,000
Yeah.
square feet pretty quickly.
Pretty
So
quick.
they're
Okay.
not tiny homes.
Okay.
By any means.
Okay.
But you could have tiny homes on them.
Any other comments on this? Tim, Scott, Jim?
I'm very comfortable with staff's suggested solution.
Okay. Ray? Okay. Everybody agree with staff's?
Just for clarification, you mean the second one? Is that correct? Because
Second one
there were
goes all the
two
way.
options.
On the bottom of page 5.
Yes.
Option one is part step.
So,
Option two is the full step.
option 2 is the property is legally platted, recorded,
Mhm.
and the property has direct access to a right-of-way, period.
Do we wanna put that it's already been built on?
No, no, because it could be an empty lot.
I don't think we
It
limited
could be an
that.
empty lot. Bless you, Lori.
Excuse me, thank you.
Tim? Roger, go ahead, Tim?
Yeah, I
Go ahead, Tim.
thought I mentioned or heard something that according to the law, if they weren't built on now, they had to conform to
No, they
the
can't.
standards now, not when it was plotted. And that's
Yes.
not listed here.
That's-
I think that's kind of an unspoken rule, isn't it?
No, I think, John, you're saying we don't have to allow them to be built on.
No, that's correct. You don't have to allow them to, they don't have a as of right ability to develop
built.
that empty substandard lot unless you provide for a procedure through MUD.
Is
Dan?
that statutory or case law?
Case law. It's,
Well, it's not the case law that I have to deal with, because I've litigated this very issue, but of course, that's Illinois, not Florida.
the
Courts have
case
held-
the case here in Florida is called Ambrose versus Monroe
Okay,
County.
well,
And went to the
that's-
Florida Supreme Court.
I defer to that if that's the case law. To me, it's bad law, because it's actually a taking. Without compensation.
So do we need to, are you saying,
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
with all due respect, the Florida Supreme Court said that given those circumstances in Florida, it is not a taking without due compensation.
did that have to do with the county it was in?
No,
Okay.
no.
So do we need to especially stipulate that they are buildable lots? Roger, were you adding something to that?
No, I was just checking something with John real quick.
Okay,
You are by this
Should we hear-
process
should we get
defining what is a
public
buildable lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay.
And there's three components to that. It's what you determine the size should
Mhm.
be, and again, we're talking platted versus whatever. You have your regular development standards, and you have access, that's a critical part to me. And then, obviously, your development standards is setbacks and footprint. So I think,
But for this MUD determination section here, do you just need A and B? The property is legally platted and the property has direct access to a right-of-way?
yeah,
Or do you need size also?
no, That's the point to the size. We want to eliminate the size square footage.
I would make a suggestion that, that criteria be expanded to include access to proper utilities, and public right-of-way. Because you don't want, to create a situation where, there's, we need to put a septic system on the lot, on a substandard lot particularly, so that it have
So
access.
if it doesn't currently have it, they would be responsible for that?
That is correct. They would have to, bring the utility lines to service the lot. That would be my recommendation.
Anyone agree or disagree?
I agree.
Agree?
Yeah, and B, we're
Okay.
gonna add the word public in?
And I'm sorry?
In item B, we're gonna add the public.
Yeah,
Public right-of-way.
Yes.
public
Yes.
right-of-way.
Well, and we were gonna actually add to that developed, because what that does, then it allows the town to decide if we do have some small rights of way that are unopened and undeveloped
Mhm.
that the town doesn't wanna maintain right now. So I wouldn't want somebody to get a lot off of one of those and claim then now we have to pave it and do something,
Got it.
so.
Okay.
So would it be appropriate to rewrite, the property has direct access to a developed public right-of-way and utilities? Is everybody
Does it
comfortable
have
with
to be a
that?
developed public right-of-way?
Yeah, that was what we just
Yeah.
spoke about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Improve
Okay.
public right-of-way.
We have public platted rights of way that we're not maintaining and
Yeah.
are open, and there are gaps between sections, and we don't wanna open them, so right now.
Right, so it has to be
Okay.
improved public right-of-way.
Okay. Any objections to that? All right, very good.
Well,
Dan?
we're dealing with example 2, right? How about
Yes.
example 1?
We're talking about skipping number 1 totally and using example number 2. Do you have an objection to that? Do you want to talk about number 1?
So one really only goes part way.
Right, that's what I think too.
It doesn't do what we're talking about doing. It
One's
loosens the range a
insufficient.
little bit.
More leeway with number 2.
Yes. With number 2, you get to make your pitch.
Yeah.
And you still agree that that number C there is the exact correct wording for that? Minimum use determination, home accessory structures or driveways on any land in the wetland or recreation category, future land use? We don't need any change to that? You think that's perfect the way it is there?
This part right here,
That
correct.
was,
That
that was
prevents
just
some
the
of
only other
those
part I wanted to make sure was.
undevelopable,
Vision anyway.
inaccessible lots don't
Thank you.
Dan, what's your exception here? What's your,
My concern on example 1 is when somebody owns 2 contiguous lots, and then he builds over them, got a home that is on both lots. And then he decides to raise that home, he shouldn't, in my view, be allowed to build 2 different homes, even though the other lots, each individual lot is a conforming lot.
Right.
There should be, there should
Boy,
be,
this was such
when
a
they
hot
build
issue.
on over 2 existing lots,
it becomes one lot?
it becomes a de facto consolidation, in my opinion. And they have consolidated those lots. It's no longer 2 lots. And, we should require, if we got it from before they did it, that when they wanted to build on 2 lots, we required it to file a plat of consolidation, so that became 1 lot.
Jane, you're shaking your head, but you remember this
I
conversation. and
remember
we
it
all
100
ended up
times,
with
and I
Dan.
bring it up at LPA all the time, and it's done 100 times around us. That's the point. It's being done, lots are being
done a
split,
lot.
houses are being built on them, where there was a house of record that commingled both lots. It's being done time and time and time again on this island. I bring it up and everybody goes, oh.
It is.
And
It
so,
has been
it's
done.
already been thrown out by what we do.
But it
And
can
it could be
but
a
it should
huge
stop.
lawsuit.
It should stop.
I think it'll be a huge lawsuit, because we had it on the books, and we allowed it, and we allowed it, and we allowed it, over and over and over again. And it was brought up on record, and it was still allowed. So I think anybody would have an opportunity to say, this has been crap forever. You guys haven't been,
Have we had a case recently?
oh, it's been since Dan and I were on, well, it's,
I mean,
With a Z.
I'm sitting here racking my head over 3 years. I don't remember a case where we have allowed a split in 3.
It's because they didn't even
They were
come
done.
before us.
They never got
They
it.
were just
Okay.
done.
They were administrative
Palermo
variances.
Circle is a good example. John?
Yeah. Every local government, this council, the LPA, future councils, future LPAs, has the ability and the authority under Florida law to modify its comprehensive plan, its land development regulations, and unless a property owner has taken affirmative steps to vest their property with development rights, no one's entitled to the continuation of a particular zoning under Florida law. You all have the right to change it, and that's pretty much black letter law.
So
and
we're protected.
So you're protected. Just because you did it before doesn't mean you have to continue to do it, particularly if you change your regulations.
Well, this actually isn't a changing of the regulation, as Jane is saying. This is an affirmation of the regulation that has been abused.
Totally.
Mhm.
I mean, I can name streets,
But
several
when-
on Palermo, one at the end of Fairweather. There, I mean,
It happened next
Yeah,
door to me on
then-
Egret Street.
Egret
We're
Street,
looking
yeah,
It's
over and over again.
This is an issue that is regularly litigated by local governments, property owners in Florida. Just because something happened before, particularly if it was done not in compliance with the regulation, does not give rise to a legal vested right. And you know, the approval issued in error cannot be relied upon by a property owner.
So now this is more of a directive to the town, no more.
So in instances where, I mean, the first option was actually looking at several issues that we have and something similar to like, it would have addressed Bonita and several other issues where there is a house that was built over the property line, but they are on 2 lots and they're large lots. They meet all of the zoning requirements. They don't meet the density requirements. So that person, somebody can't sell that home with the 2 lots and the next person buy it and say, okay, I want 2 homes instead of this one giant old house. That does meet, you know, the zoning district size, but doesn't meet the density because the density is very low in that location. I mean, that's what this was looking at a couple different issues that were associated to that. So you don't think that that's appropriate if there were 2 lots and these are the same size lots as everybody else in the neighborhood, that you would allow them to have those 2 lots again?
Can you give me a real example? Because I'm a visual person, and do we use the example of that, what was my favorite house on the beach that's now the big giant bank building at Mid-Island, about the 3,000 block? Across the street from you. Oh, I love that house. And so was that 2 lots? Is that now 2 lots? Is that just give me an example.
I don't know. The example
Okay.
I have in my packet is 269 Driftwood.
Okay,
So
I don't
it's,
know. Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
it's
do-
an older home
How
that
about
has
at the top
4.
of Jefferson Street, where those 3 houses went? Okay?
They all blend in together to us. So.
Where
We're talking
the
about-
historical homes
Anita,
were moved.
I can. The property next to me was a double lot, okay, 120 feet, so 2 60-foot lots. There was a 600 square foot house smack dab in the middle. It was raised, because prior to it being raised, people had tried to separate it, but as long as the house was there, nobody was allowed to separate it. They raised the house and then applied for separation and built 2 very large houses on those lots.
And they applied a separation to the Lee County property appraiser, not to the town. Is that correct?
Correct.
Could the glitch be there?
Yes.
No,
At
it's
this
here.
point, it would,
For that property, it was the county, to my knowledge.
There's several on Palermo that were done. One was the Target home.
Yeah, I know the
One,
Palermo's.
another
Yeah.
one was,
Okay, so.
several waterfronts that were
Sarah,
buildable
how do
lots.
we, what's your suggestion here?
personally, I mean, the way I've seen it in other places, so I've seen if a lot is too small for the zoning district and they want to re-subdivide out those lots, that they don't allow them to re-subdivide out those lots. But density doesn't play into that typically. The issue is that our density and our zoning districts don't match. In this instance, it's an RC zoned lot. RC allows very small lots, but it's in the low density district.
That's interesting.
So they're required to have a much lower density than it was platted to have. It would match the surrounding environment because we're talking about legally platted lots.
That's what I'm.
So granted, they are building different things now than they were building in the 60s, but that doesn't change that they would like to have two structures, instead of one structure that just sort of has a garage on the adjacent property, it crosses over a little bit, or, maybe they built it right in the middle and now they're saying, this is a tiny little house that we don't want. Do you want to take that platted lot? Do you want to say that because they ever built a house that crossed it, that's not a platted lot anymore?
Well, I'll tell you what, that was
I
the
mean-
discussion.
Well, and I think
Yes,
that,
Roger.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Go
Say
ahead.
something further?
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that if you want us to clarify that if you're modifying this applying for a subdivision, modifying the subdivision, or attempting to do a unity of title to join two lots or whatever, that's coming from the council for approval. I mean, to restate the obvious, we could do that too. So that if, someone says, well, I went to Lee County, they said it was okay, we say, well, it doesn't matter, you didn't come before us.
What was the Driftwood address, Sarah?
It's
275?
269 Driftwood.
So I'm
Okay.
looking on Lee
Yeah.
for-
I'm looking.
I would like, I think that if they are legal lots of record and are commingled by a single-family home, if the single-family home is destroyed or removed, and they are legal lots of record that are contiguous with the neighborhood surrounding, if they're all
Same size.
60 by 100-foot lots, that they should be, if they meet this minimum determination of being able to be, have their utilities, that they should be buildable lots. Because most people realize when they're buying a double lot, that it's a double lot, not just a single lot.
What about, Jane,
Hmm?
what about the adjacent property owner, in Lori Wolf's example? She, when there's a double lot, there's not a white stripe down it that you know that it's a double lot. You bought the house on each side, and you bought your house adjacent to this
Mhm.
double lot,
Mhm.
because it was a nice yard and everything in between you.
Mhm.
And now you've got somebody that's 10 feet from you.
Well, you know that every
So it's two
property
tiny
has a
little lots.
7.5-foot setback, so
Well,
you should know
But
that they could
aren't you
expand that
entitled-
lot.
Aren't you entitled to consider that that's just one lot, and not
It's okay.
two?
If it's one lot,
Just
it's
because
one
it's
lot.
two on paper, when
Well,
it's one to
So-
a person looking at it.
What we're dealing with is, in all due respect to Dan's example, the lots on either side of you are the smaller lots. So I think that's where, they're basically infill lots is what we're dealing with. I guess that's a better term to use, is trying to allow these infill lots to be infilled and let the neighborhoods develop out and finish. It's a dozen here, 5 or 6 there, that's what we're talking about. Otherwise, you've got a double lot in the middle of a 20 lot stretch, you've got a double lot, there'll always be a double lot. In current code, because of that corner of that house or the porch went over that line, suddenly they can't build on both those lots. That's where step one came in, is because we felt we had to at least fix that issue. That just because a piece of the building crept over that line a few feet, all of a sudden they couldn't build on both lots.
And in 269 Driftwood, that's the problem. You've got a garage or something,
And
It eliminates it from the option to be able to build on both.
And also, what I said
tiny
earlier about
lots.
building
Gosh,
different
tiny.
things now than were being built in the 60s. Now, if somebody buys that double lot, they have a 7.5-foot setback, which means they can build a monster from side to side. They're not limited, and now there's nothing in the middle, so. Yeah, so, I mean, and you are seeing more of that, where there's a double lot and they used to put a cute little house in the middle and have a big yard, and they're not doing that now. So you're gonna see either 2 houses with setbacks, or you're gonna see 1 house with setbacks.
especially if it's on water.
And I'm not saying that that has to be done, I'm just saying that that's what we're seeing.
Are you seeing more people wanting to split them? Or are you seeing just bigger houses? Because it seems like we're seeing just bigger houses.
A combination. Some people are choosing to do the duplex homes if they have enough density to do a duplex. Some people want to split them out if it's a new buyer. A lot of times they want to go ahead and knock down the older house and split it and build a house for themselves and maybe sell a house or build a house for their kids.
To Sarah's point, I would hope you'd see smaller homes on these smaller lots versus, I think what you're talking about is combining 2 or 3 lots to create a monster home, which then changes the character of that neighborhood.
You know what it is though, Jason, it's relative because you'd hope you'd see smaller homes, but it's, from what it is to what it would be is mammoth. So, okay, so what's our conclusion on this?
Well, my only thought is what it could be is larger mammoth because you have the double lot. That if you're allowed to split what was a buildable lot to 2 houses, they still have to have setbacks. It makes it more normal to the neighborhood than having a huge monstrosity in the middle of regular homes.
Okay, good point.
It's filling it in the way it was meant to be
Right.
when it was platted.
Okay, so we allow them to be split?
I think so. They were plotted.
And the point being, if all the other lots are 60, 60, 60, now you got a 120 and they're splitting back to 60, 60, it's in character of the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
It
But are we
seems
contradicting
appropriate.
ourselves? Because what we don't want is for them to split the lot. We don't want them to, well, gosh darn it.
There's still a size box that can go into the lot. So
That's right.
if the
That's another
if
issue.
the lot fronts a street, it should be able to have a box.
I think we're trying to solve a problem in the wrong way. We are offended by the overly large homes, and this isn't the place we solve it. We solve it by addressing that section of the code and addressing the setbacks, et cetera.
But
So as much as I would prefer not to have 2 houses on 2 60-foot lots, I think that's the right way to do it, and we attack the issue through the correct section of the code.
Okay.
2 different issues.
so we're allowing the split? Is everybody?
Yes, I'm agreeing with you,
Good,
Jane.
good,
Let's write
good,
it down.
good. I'm trying to make sure that everybody else.
And I live on
understands.
Laurie Street, so I am offended by what happened there, but I think the way to solve the problem is not by denying the right to build the homes, but to address that proper section of the code.
I think that makes a lot of sense, yes.
Okay, but they still have to meet, it still has to meet this other criteria.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Conform with the code.
Does anyone object to that?
I just want to be clear, this is not allowing anybody to do anything other than come before you. I want to be clear about that.
We get that.
Okay, good.
We just don't want to waste our time on the back end.
No, I hear you, I hear you, but I don't want people to say, well, I heard in this discussion
Yeah,
that
exactly.
I'm allowed, so therefore I'm allowed.
Thank you for that.
Right.
Actually,
Dan?
to clarify,
If a person now owns 2 lots and are undeveloped, and he decides to build a home on both lots, and he goes for a building permit, do we issue a building permit?
Yes.
He wants to build, if they own 2 lots,
And
He
they're
wants to-
building on 2 lots, they're building across the lot line.
Reverse,
They
in
can do that.
reverse.
We issue a building permit without requiring a consolidation of the lots?
well, I think that's a mistake,
I do
if we
too.
do. If they're building one
I do
house
too.
across 2 lots, they're saying this is now 1 lot.
Yes,
So that in the future, that house can't be torn down. It's just another example of this 1 lot, 2 lot situation. They buy two tiny little lots on Driftwood. I just bought those 2 lots. Now, I'm going to build 1 big house on that, because what we're assuming is that this guy with the garage encroachment is going to tear that down and build 2 houses.
He could build a giant house now. You could buy 5 lots and build a giant house. There's no max.
A big spot there.
But the question is,
But-
do we say you
Once
don't,
you
you no longer have 5 lots, you have 1 lot because you have 1 house?
So I think the answer to your question, Madam Mayor, is that we will require a unity of title. And if a person doesn't wanna give us one, they'll have to come up from the LPA town council and explain why.
Yeah, so the way it generally works is the plat is the underlying recorded part of the record, right? So it's a paper document that's recorded, and it's easier to refer to than meets and bounds, than the
Sure.
30 feet west of the stake in the tree down by the road. It's lot 7, right? So if you have lot 7 and 8, you can combine those under a parcel ID number for tax purposes, and then you don't have a center line setback. You have the perimeter for the setback. When we review an application for a house on that, it's based on that perimeter of that. If they have two separate, you can't build a house over that lot line because you're in violation of
Okay,
that setback that's in the middle.
okay.
You can create those two lots under one parcel and treat that like one buildable lot. It's not gonna gain you any benefit for a second house on one of those lots if you built over the middle. You're only gonna get the one on the middle.
Okay. Have we solved the original issue that we were talking about?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes, but I wanna be clear, we're gonna require a unity of title of those two lots in the circumstances that Jason just described.
Thank you, Roger.
Is that what?
I can't speak to unity title, but yeah, they have to show ownership of both lots, and it's under one legal description. So your legal description, your deed would say lot 7 and 8.
I'm going beyond just the legal description, they're gonna have to unify the two lots. There's a document to do that.
You have to vacate the plat, which you can't really do that.
No, you can legally do a unity of title, which would, for our purposes, would establish that we are now moving forward, and the property owner will treat that as one, and they'll convey it subject to it being one lot unless they come before us and get the unity of title released. Our unity of title should be, and legally is, distinct from what the property appraiser requires. The property appraiser does it because under state law, they're required to identify each parcel of land with a home on it for purposes of determining just valuation and for tax purposes. That's why they do it. In situations such as this, it is extremely common for local governments to require a unity of title that says that it's going to be built as one lot, it's going to be maintained as one lot, will be treated as one lot until such time as the property owner comes before the council and asks for the release of the unity title, and then you can condition, they're like, well, then you have to demolish the existing home and convert it back to two separate lots, but you know that's counterintuitive because you then run back into the issue that you're discussing already, which is it's substandard.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to point out, is that you're forcing people to create the exact same situation that we don't want to, that we're trying to fix now, where because the minimum use determination said that if a house crosses over that line, you can't redivide them unless they meet all of the code requirements, including the comprehensive plan density. So by requiring them to be combined with a unity of title, you're creating the issue that we're trying to resolve right now. So somebody, in order to build that house back then, would have had to do a unity of title, and now they would be at the point of
Stuck.
not being able to divide it out into plats, into the originally platted lots.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if that's what you want to do.
And I'm confused on what, I guess, the issue of the ownership is, the one lot versus two lots.
It's just for at least, go ahead, Dan.
Well, we don't have a subdivision ordinance, I don't believe, subdivision regulations. So when you're talking about combining it on the county tax assessment roll, again, I'm going back to Illinois.
Dan, pull your microphone over.
We had a subdivision regulation which required that those lots be re-subdivided. We call it a plat of consolidation. They're already subdivided lots under a plat of subdivision. When they combine it, those two lots have another separate plat. That plat's recorded with the county recorder, and that's now one lot. And that's wholly apart from what the tax assessor does.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Scott, you have anything to add to this? Questions? Lori, anything else?
No.
Tim?
Yeah, I just for a clarification, we've talked about a lot of things here dealing with the different sizes of lots. The paperwork we have in front of us are dealing with MUD, which is under a certain square footage of these lots. what it's allowed to do as opposed to what the larger lots are allowed to do. And I think that's just where my clarification comes in. If I hear everybody what they're saying, if you have a normal standard size lot and you purchase a normal standard size lot next to it, you decide to build a house that crosses the center line. 10 years from now, someone else decides to tear it down and they want to subdivide and build 2 houses. We're back into our normal standard size lots again. But when we get into the mud area of this, where we have smaller than normal size lots, if someone has built one because they own 2 lots, it's gone over the center line, are they allowed or not allowed to subdivide that property should they decide to? And I think that's where we really look at,
Yeah.
because we're, isn't the objective trying to get rid of the smaller lots?
Well, no, it's really trying to give that person a clear ability of, or clear definition of what they're allowed to do. So in the example that you just gave, we would allow them to take that old house down and build on each lot, provided that it has right-of-way, it has street frontage, and,
And get utilities too.
and yes, you can get
And the
utilities too.
utilities.
Right, we're going away from a number of square foot to the fact that it's actually platted and has access
And-
to utilities and to roads.
What we don't want to do is open the opportunity for lots that don't, there are platted lots in this community that don't meet these criteria, that are not buildable because they're in a wetland, they don't have road frontage, there's no access, there's no
Okay.
utilities. You don't want to open the door for those. But ones that are on a block that are already pretty much built out,
They're
that's the
already
ones
on
that
the
we're
street.
struggling with and trying to allow.
Got it?
And
Thanks
that's
for
where
the
I think some of the fear was,
Good.
is those lots, some of the fear was some of those lots that don't meet this criteria, what happens to those? And we're saying nothing happens to those, they stay the same, they can't be built on, they're not
Yep.
buildable lots.
Joanne, anything further?
No, I'm sure people will say, oh, well, you're theoretically increasing the density because there's 2 instead of 1. But, you know, it actually is in scale. If we're talking about platted properties, I don't think you're gonna have anywhere all of a sudden there's a platted 40-foot where there was 80 feet on each side. On the beachfront, there are occasional, the beachfront's weird. But in the other subdivided neighborhoods, really, I'm comfortable with it because that's how they were platted. And the only other thing would be is I would not want them to have a lot of ability for variance. I mean, if you're gonna build, if you're gonna separate them out, it's gonna be like everybody else's lot, then don't come in then and expect to put 2 giant megas on. You know,
Build to the lot
it's
size.
subject to the current regulations.
And,
Wait, hold on, Jane. Megan, you have anything to add to this?
no, I'm in agreement with,
Ray?
I think John was gonna say something. John, were you gonna say something in response to Dan, what Dan said earlier?
Dan is correct. You can require, or a property owner can go through the process of replatting. And we do have a process under Florida law, the county code, and our code. However, in that situation, you're essentially creating a plat of one lot. And you'd have to get all the approvals from all the other property owners, the initial plat, et cetera. And that is why many governments in this particular instance, in fact, use the unity of title in lieu of replatting, because it's a more efficient and time efficient process than requiring the property owner to go to a much more expensive and time consuming process of replatting to create one single lot that's larger than the rest.
Excellent. Jane?
I'm happy with what we're doing with allowing the lots to stand based on these requirements. I don't think I understand why we would require a lot to be unified when we're just doing this to make it more contiguous with the neighborhood. If a big house is built and the next buyer wants to tear it down and put 2 houses, because
It's
there's.
a question of density. It's the question of density.
It's not if you can do it with an existing house, so why would it be if it is a new house, future, that doesn't want a mega house?
I don't know. Okay.
So why add another layer of government to what we're making simple?
Because in the interim, there have been perhaps other decisions that affect the person's ability to do that.
I haven't seen anybody tear down a house well, everybody that has torn down a house, that has bought a house, has put two properties
Yeah,
on
but
it.
you may have allowed someone on the other sides of those houses and across the street from that house and behind that house to do certain things because that was one big house on
Exactly.
that lot, that now that they want to switch it to smaller houses on that lot, it changes that paradigm. It's a snapshot in time. So the person who's building next door says, I want to build it, by the way, I want a smaller setback because look, I'm next to this big house and they have a 25-foot setback already, so therefore I want to go closer to my property line. And you say, sure, no problem, because
That doesn't have anything to do with joining the lot.
it does, because joining a lot means that if you have that big house at that time, you can come in front of council and ask to go back to two houses, but you don't have the unequivocal right to do it on your own.
Okay.
I think what he's trying to say, though, is that people come in front of us, other property owners come in front of us for variances and such, and we look at the surrounding neighborhoods, we look at the surrounding properties, and we allow these variances and other changes based off of what's currently there. And once we change that back to two lots and something else has changed, we have allowed a variance over here of some sort of building, something, maybe it's a side setback or something, that we can't take back. It's already done deal, and the parameters of the neighborhood have changed, if I have you right. And so, we made decisions as a greater whole based off of that big lot there and that big house to allow a neighbor to do something else, and now we've changed this and we've changed parameters that we can't take back.
The big
is what he's
house
saying.
and the small house have the same setbacks.
Not when they come
Absolutely
in
the
front
same.
of us and not, okay, so lot number 3, so we have 1 and 2 connected, and we have lot 3. Lot 3 came in front of us, or house 3 came in front of us and asked us for a side setback variance or some variance. And we gave it to them,
Mhm.
because under the guise that there's this big house next to
A
it.
variance
there's
is
all
an
this open
individual thing
space.
done for an individual
And then
purpose.
it's changed, and that's what he's saying, we have to be very careful here, is that we've allowed a lot of
The
various
answer
changes.
is that if nothing is changed, then I would assume that when whoever is sitting here on the LPA and the council at that time would say, fine, undivide the lots. But if something has changed, you have the right to say, well, wait a second, the paradigm has changed and now you're creating an impact by doing this.
There's a distinction between the buildability of the lot
That's right.
and the setbacks, as Roxanne pointed out.
That's right.
That's another issue that could be dealt with to deal with the hypotheticals that have been thrown out here.
Yeah. Okay, Jim, you have anything else to add? Okay, Dan or Rexanne, anything? I already asked you. Sarah or Jason, any clarification on this, or are you good to go?
Well,
I really am not sure where we ended up. Are we going with 1? Are we going with 2? Are we going
You're
with
going
neither?
with,
Number
you're
2.
going
My
with
understanding
2.
is we're going with two,
Okay.
right?
Yes, you're going with 2.
Two with public right-of-way
And
access-
utilities.
And access to existing
Mhm.
utilities.
Okay,
And
thank you.
improved right-of-way. And requiring unity of title.
Yes, and the unity of title.
Okay, so that's where I'm confused, with requiring the unity of title.
If the,
Because
if the
that-
lots are joined,
So that does reverse what you're trying to accomplish,
Yeah.
just so you're
It
aware.
It's
kind
in a
of-
circle,
it
we
was
don't,
a circle, yeah.
yeah, we
That's
don't
what
want
I'm
the
saying.
unity of
That's,
title.
that's why I'm trying to figure out, did you want this, or did you
No.
want
No.
something different?
Don't want the unity of title.
No, it's not, they don't conflict with one another.
Yes, they do.
I'm trying to understand what the purpose of the keeping two lots joined together is. I understand there's a process, I'm not familiar with the unity of title part.
If they're coming in, no, the point with the unity of title is if they're coming in with one house on two lots,
Right.
okay, today, they say, I want to build a house that crosses the two lots. We need to, besides saying, well, and I've joined them on the property appraiser's records, we'd say, well, we need a unity of title. Okay? That's what we need. If they come back 5, 10, 15, later after, and they say, now I've changed my mind, I want to knock down the one big house and build two houses, they have to go through a process to undo that. That's what we're saying. They can't just do it by right. If they have a small house now, or they come in today, they want to build a small house on a small lot, that's what this is covering.
What's the advantages of that? I think is what.
Well,
local
So
we're getting.
I can get a point of if you want to encourage the smaller scale, that would probably do that because it's an extra process. That would definitely accomplish that potentially.
But he
If you want
doesn't
them to
want
build on the two lots, you would definitely avoid this issue of the joining them with the future holds and having to come back before you. It would encourage somebody to build two smaller homes.
It was my understanding that we went with option 2 and we added the words developed public to it. But the unity of title thing went all the way around and it doesn't achieve, it stands in the way of what they were trying to achieve.
Exactly.
Okay,
So
so here in the mud thing, we're
I'm-
gonna leave that out.
I agree.
Well,
Right, right?
I don't,
And-
that's up to you guys. I don't know
No,
enough
no.
about it specifically to.
If I may, Mayor, we'll work, I'll work with staff to find the right place for the
Okay.
unity title. I
Perfect.
get
Perfect.
what we're trying to do here.
Thank you very much, John.
So does
Okay.
staff, I mean, we'll work.
Yes. Is that good, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on to the next item then, which is a
The fun one.
doozy. Building height
It's a fun
in the
aspect.
LD, and massing in the LDC. Rexanne, you wanna start?
I'm leaning in on this because the thing that I thought when I read this was, the thing that jumped out at me was, when we've discussed this before, we have discussed setbacks at the same time we've discussed building height, and they're also interrelated. I hesitate to discuss this so separately, that we don't have setbacks in front of us here, we just have building height, and I hesitate to say, okay, I'm good with this, because I don't know what we're gonna do with setbacks. I thought they were gonna come to us together.
The setbacks are in the house itself.
No,
If you go up, you set back, you set back.
I'm talking about side setbacks that are currently 7.5 feet that I don't think are big enough. And I have been over and over saying, that's a bad idea and we need to increase our side setbacks. And this was also in conjunction with a discussion Ray and I were making a very strong point that our neighbors built these homes with these tiny side setbacks, and their AC and their pool pumps are driving us nuts because they're right next to our bedroom windows.
Well, those should be included in the building.
But what I'm saying is, these 3 topics are so interrelated that if we discuss this height thing separately from the setbacks, then we're going to have unintended consequences.
Rexanne, I agree with you. And, the one thing that I see, just to sort of start that thought process, I'm gonna talk about the beachfront because I'm so familiar with it, but you have properties, there's a lot of standard 75-foot properties, and so their setbacks happen to be 7.5 feet. For instance, my property's 65 feet wide, so I get the 10%, which is 6.5 feet. But when you get bigger, you get the 80-foot, the 100-foot. I think it should be 10% sliding that way too. In other words, everybody's, so when you have an 80-foot property, you get an 8-foot, 90-foot property, you get 9-foot. In other words, the bigger the lot, it's always 10%. I just throw that out as a beginning conversation. If you go, oh my God, that's okay, respond. I'm throwing that out as a starting point for conversation of how you equitably do that. We kind of already do it, it's just the bigger lots don't get it. The bigger lots have the same as a small, as a 75-foot lot.
That's a
And
great idea.
that would,
Because
it's
if
just everybody's 10%.
if you look at a 50-foot
But what I'm saying is, that you're going off on that discussion, which I want to have, but we don't have the stuff in front of us about that, and to me, they're so interrelated
Well,
that,
I intended on talking about that anyway, because what I noticed.
We're gonna talk about it.
but I don't think
agree.
we can talk about it because it's hard, well, you saw with our last discussion, it was hard enough for us to get through it with printed stuff in front of us about it. But with Joanne throwing out ideas that I haven't had a chance to read, think about, make notes, I don't think we can have the discussion yet, is what I'm saying. What I would be asking is, I think we need to hold this off until we can talk about them together, and I need printed materials about the setbacks at the same time.
Would it be possible for us to have the discussion just about height, and then we can, if it's in the right direction, because this is really what this is about, is this the right direction? Is this the way we want to do this? And then you can give me additional feedback on how you want to view setbacks, and I can apply that. But first, look at just this information to determine if this is kind of the way we want to go, but we need to work with it, or if this is totally wrong and not what you want, and I need to start over again, just so that
It's a good idea.
so that I
you
have
just
a
want direct-
starting point.
Okay, so some more direction
Yeah.
on this piece of it.
Because this is what I wrote based on the original conversation about height, you know, bringing it in, bringing it up, bringing it in, you know? But if this is too much, if this is the wrong way, if this is not what you guys had in mind, great, tell me that. Or if you say, this is the direction, now incorporate different setbacks based on X, Y, or Z, I can do that too.
I just want to make sure that this doesn't go all the way through the process by itself.
No.
No.
No. And, go ahead, Jason.
I was just to say, it won't, because we agree. I think the problem with, you want to see the text, it's a 7.5 foot side yard setback, right? So, or non-conforming lot is 10%. I think it's the context of whether it's bigger lots and all that. We don't have any text to show you to compare to that because that's a new concept. So it's hard to give you a visual or give you the text of what you want to edit other than, we know 7.5 doesn't work, right? So what is that correct number? And I'm hoping that Sarah's presentation, talk about this height, will give us a better direction, kind of maybe backwards from your thinking, but yes, we like that approach, and actually let's apply that across the board. That may be a moment that we get to, or not. I
You
hope.
know, at its core, when we incorporated, we were so obsessed with height that we encouraged this as opposed to this, same box. We encouraged this. What we've eliminated unintentionally was the view that we got here as opposed to here. Now, Joanne's gonna argue with me that you can plant areca palms and whatever here, and you will never have that view. But we could do something about that view and still have the same size box. But we were all across the board obsessed with height.
And you know what? You and I do talk about that in the landscaping and infill, but seeing trees with a beautiful sky in between is a lot different
nicer.
than the canyon effect of buildings that look like you can pass sugar through the windows. So, you know,
Exactly right.
so we really don't disagree.
No, we don't disagree in
It's
principle.
the idea of being able to see sunlight along the
Exactly.
way.
And breeze.
Yes.
Breeze comes through a tree, it doesn't go through a cement wall.
I think we all agree on that.
So Sarah, would you like to begin the discussion here?
Sure. I touched on a few different topics here. Let's start off with how we're measuring the height of the building.
Okay.
So currently, we measure to the eave, which means, yes,
I'll tie this in later.
yeah.
It's
So
page
I'm
11.
gonna hand something out. That
Oh,
was in the
good.
packet, and it's for my discussion point later, but it also ties into what Sarah's talking about.
Thank you.
So the way that we currently measure height, we measure to the eave, which means you can get a giant massive roof which has living space within it above the eave. This leads to houses that don't care how big their roofs are. You know, these are large houses and they put a massive roof on top, which just adds to the height and the massing that's unpleasant. The way I would like to measure it is the mean distance between the eave and the peak. This is how most communities do it, and that way, whenever they're looking at how they're gonna build their house, they're not building a giant roof that they could put living space in. They're building a normal size, minimum size roof so that it doesn't count against their height. They can have more living space in the floors. So it eliminates just really massive roof lines. That was the reasoning behind that. I didn't change the height that's permitted in the zoning districts. It's as permitted now. I would like to point out that a lot of communities use 30 feet instead of 25 feet, in addition to using the roof as part of the measurement. So the mean height of the roof, so between eave and peak, and they have 30 feet instead of 25. That isn't required. I included some pictures that show what that looks like. So, yes,
So-
go ahead.
I was just saying, so the picture I handed out, the difference basically is the measurements to the where the angled lines, the roof line that I drew in there. We measure height to the bottom of that where it connects to the vertical wall, where the roof sits on the house. Okay?
Where the roof sits on the house.
Yep,
Okay.
it's the highest vertical wall.
Okay.
The difference being what Sarah's talking about is what's drafted here, at least is for discussion purposes, is measuring it to the middle of that roof line.
Okay,
So right now, the height is not changed. She hasn't proposed changing the height, so essentially that squeezes everything below it. I handed this out as an example of, I drew the roof line that we would allow by code.
mhm,
It's interpreted right now that what's proposed underneath there, the design that you see, is not allowed. If they put a regular roof on a bigger mass, they could build it. They can't build this lower profile brought-in roof line, which I think is a.
the cake, the
Right.
wedding
They
cake.
They cannot build what they want to build here. They would have to put on a massive roof by our code today. So
Mhm.
basically what I'm saying is what we're proposing, it does a couple things, right? It changes kind of where you measure to help squeeze that height a little bit, but also, I think ultimately allows greater flexibility in how you design. In my opinion, this is within that box what we would allow. It probably should be allowed, but right now our code does not specifically allow the design that you see underneath. But it's more, this design underneath is more in line with what we're talking about. If you want to go higher, then you bring it in kind of design. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So if you go to packet page 27, that shows a comparison with the existing condition to the side and then the base height, which means the new way of measuring. You know, just the slight visual difference, and that is because they've, you know, sort of squeezed the floors together a little bit because, and do note that we used a house that didn't have a massive roof so that we weren't totally changing the design to accomplish this.
Because we're measuring to a higher point with the same number. Now, again, you can change that number from 25 to 30, then you would get back the underneath part. But for right now, it squeezes below that a little bit.
So if you look at the existing condition is off to, let me see if I can actually, okay.
Oh,
Let
good.
me- I thought it would be good for everybody at home who's watching to be able to see this too. Okay, that one. Okay, so the existing condition, all the roof is above the allowed height. So it's 25 feet, and that's from, we used, I think, a base flood elevation of 13 in this instance. So there's enough room for garage below, and then there's the house above, and that's 25 feet of house, and right now we measure to the eave. With the new one, it would be 25 feet above base flood elevation, and we're measuring to mid-height of the roof. So it just lowers it down a little bit.
Mhm.
The next step that I took was regarding the setbacks.
Mhm.
So if you know, one thing that we talked about is sticks and carrots. You know, giving people the opportunity to do something different that works for them, and then they give something back that the community wants. In this instance, we want to have better, you know, sight to, you know, sight, light. So the next step would be to require the second story. You'd get an additional 5 feet in height, but you'd require that second story to be set in an additional 5 feet.
Mhm.
So okay,
Yep.
so that shows us what
Oh,
the
so
base
much more
height plus
interesting
5.
looking.
So you bring in that second story, and it has requirements for how much wall you can have on that first floor, so that people don't have a wall all the way up the side and they just cut in where they want to cut in. There's a requirement to cut in and have that additional space at the top.
Mhm.
So that gives them an additional 5 feet. That puts them about where the existing condition is.
Mhm.
So they're getting a little bit of extra height if they want the extra tall ceilings. And then the next step is the base height plus 5 plus, that's still plus 5, where is it? Okay, plus a story. So, in this one, you get an additional, is that right? Yeah, that's off to the side, sorry. Let me bring it to
There.
the middle, there we go. So this is base height plus 5 plus an additional story. So, I wish this one were next to the existing conditions one. So, in this one, you have to bring in the sides an additional 5 feet, that's at the base. The base of the house has to be in, so you'd be at 12.5 feet instead of 7.5 feet. Or the other option is to leave the entire first floor open except for 300 square feet. So open underneath, so there's a view through the bottom, or brought in 5 additional feet. And then each layer up each story up requires an additional 5 feet in, and that's on all sides so that you increase the light that you can get in, in between the homes, essentially. So,
So eliminate a garage.
no.
Gain a story.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting an additional story, and you're not eliminating a garage.
Me
Well,
too.
really, and this is a duplex. I would like to note that this is a duplex because it's got two-car garages, which would
Mhm.
not be allowed in a single-family dwelling. So we used the typical lot size and lot style that we're seeing along Estero Boulevard and the
Right.
beach, just so we
Right.
can. This actually is based on a house that is on the beach.
Okay.
So there is what it looks like from the ground. See the additional space that you're getting out of that.
And we thought this was important because you talk about the vegetation, and I think you can see the difference even with vegetation.
Yes.
I keep calling it the Y effect. It
Yes.
creates this
Mhm.
this Y look between
Mhm.
the buildings that opens up the light in the air.
Mhm.
And this example gives gives something that people are asking for. They do want that additional story on top, and they're not currently able to get by our code. They're giving the town back something that we want, which is better visibility. You're actually getting very similarly sized homes, but we get more light plane in between.
Mhm.
And, front and back. So it's not gonna be like a flat face against the street and a flat face against the back.
Mhm.
It's gonna be brought in.
Mhm.
So we want you also to think about this in context of if you don't give these carrot stick thing and you go stick with your normal box, but then you increase the setbacks. Do you accomplish just increasing the setbacks, something similar to this or better, or is it worse, right? So if you still have the vertical wall and you go to 10 feet or 12 feet or whatever it is, do you still accomplish? I think you gotta compare those and visualize that. And I don't know that you
And-
accomplish that with a greater setback.
And I like this when I see it.
Right.
But what I felt like was happening is this was being presented to me in place of looking at the setback
Yeah.
issue. So,
No, I want, because I think it's important to think, okay, this looks great, and does it maximize light, does it maximize what you want? If you mandated bigger setbacks, but didn't change the design criteria, would you achieve what you want to achieve?
Exactly,
And I
because if
don't-
we
and I
said,
don't know.
if we said we just want to go to 12.5-foot setbacks, we'd still have a giant big box.
right.
So I think the look above
Mhm.
the eye level and looking towards the
Absolutely.
sky makes a difference.
Joanne?
I love this, and, on Longboat Key, rather than doing the specifically 5 feet, okay, here's the issue. So you have a 100-foot lot, and you have, once again, the 60-foot lot or different smaller lots. So you really can't take away 5 feet on them. It needs to be some percentage, so, and that's why, like, Longboat Key went with an angle. If you're a 60-foot lot, your daylight, 50 feet or less lot width, your daylight plane is 65 degrees. But then it becomes 62 degrees, and then 50, they did this whole, which is very, very complicated, but it shows the concept that you are going to have to adapt this for lot size, just as we may adapt the setbacks as well in this whole concept. But I love it. My only concern is when I look at page 11, the flat or Bermuda roof, making sure that our language doesn't allow a deck up there. Right now, we don't want party decks up on flat roofs.
Actually,
It does.
Jason and I have spoken about this. It does appear to allow it.
Well,
The
and
way the
people
code
seem to
is.
I know people
Yes, the
seem
way
to
the-
have them, and I'm getting complaints
Well,
about it,
the
so.
way the code's written, they are permitted. They
Yeah.
can't have living space up there, they can't have a roof up there, but they are permitted to have a deck up there. They're permitted to have a pool up there. It can't, I was trying to resolve that with clarifying, yes. We're looking at page 13, the new A at the top. Says decks do not qualify as architectural appurtenances, because the way it is written before, it's included, and it's not clear what is intended by that. So this way, it's clear that that's not counted as an architectural appurtenance, and it can be built, but it can't be above the maximum height. So if the height of your building is 25 feet, you can't build your house put your roof on top of that, have that above 25 feet, and then put a deck on that. If you want a deck.
And have a railing or what?
Yes,
Okay.
you have to have that deck within the 25 feet.
I saw the connection there, and I just wanted
Yeah.
to mention it.
Because it is not currently clear in our code, and it's not specifically prohibited or allowed.
Right. And my only other concern is, once again, the elevators, whatever, now we've got 3 stories, and people are gonna put that extra whatever for their elevator shaft, their AC, and all that in the code, and we're gonna have 4 stories. I noticed, like on Longboat, I think they only allow 120 square feet. It's very small. How do we go about that? Because we have to recognize, right now, there's houses on the market that it says bonus space. It's up in the 3rd story. There's photographs of them set up as an office with a 3rd story view, and it wasn't supposed to. How do we get around that? I love this. How do we not wind up having it be 4 stories next? Because people always push the envelope.
Because now you're counting that roof space. That roof space is counted. That's part of, we don't currently allow that additional story. That was being snuck into space.
Yes.
Because they, like I said, they have massive roofs. They somehow ended up with these huge living units on their 3rd floor that we weren't aware of because it wasn't being watched carefully. Now, as part of this, you're including that roof height. So if you build up 15 extra feet, well, that counts against the height of your building. All your other floors have to be lower in order to fit in. And we don't allow it. Our code doesn't allow it. As far as the mechanical equipment, we do allow mechanical and structural appurtenances not exceeding 250 square feet. We don't see those as much in houses as we do in commercial construction. But that's what our code currently allows, and I don't see that specific issue being a problem to allow for the extra space that's needed to put the mechanical equipment in there above flood and everything. But if that is a concern, I mean,
Well,
we
going
could
up, it
certainly
might
look at it.
become one. I think that's what the council is alluding to. If you allow them, you allow them to officially start using this space, it may become one. And we could address that by just saying that if it's not within if it's not within the box, then you have to come before council and show us where it's gonna be and make sure that everyone likes it.
And there's ways not exceeding the
Right.
total roof height, right? I mean, you're gonna have a
Yes.
peak. I mean,
Jason,
there's-
nobody
sorry.
can hear you.
They're not exceeding the total roof height. I mean, there's ways to also address that. So, because right now you allow above the height, the 15 feet, the 200 square feet, or 250 square feet. And so all these things get added up and combined into this big tower or whatever else might be
Yeah,
towering above.
We definitely, again, I think one of the things we wanna do is make it clear that the top is the top is the top, and there's nothing above the top.
Right.
The other thing is that, if the council and the LPA kinda like this concept, the other thing we could do is make sure that while we'll encourage, attractive landscaping, along the side lot lines, we'll make sure, we can also make sure that it's not so intense that you can't see through.
That's where you
Give
really
a
have to
opaque
tighten it.
yeah.
That's where it has to be tightened, on the landscaping.
Give a transparency level, or what did we
Well,
say on
we just have to-
TPI,
Opacity.
for the fence? Oh,
Opacity.
opacity. Yeah.
Opacity.
And then the last
Opacity.
thing, of
It's
course,
Opacity
to
for
me is
opacity.
the porches, balconies, and stoops, and that's really over in 34,638. But I want to make sure that we have to stop letting porches, balconies, and stoops come forward, because along the boulevard, you've got a 25-foot setback. We want to make sure that, your porch, balcony, stoop is all designed in there. In this example, for instance, it would be set back in. It also adds architectural interest, but it also keeps it from closing in on the street.
Consensus on that specific
I
one.
think s-
Last time we had consensus. that
Exactly,
the box, and it
The
doesn't-
box is the box, and you don't get these extra little things going in
Okay,
each
I
direction.
just want to hold on 1 second and get a comment from everyone on the comparison that's on the screen right now. Scott?
I'm all for it. I mean, you see a lot more of a plane. I'm okay with going up a little bit, shrinking it in. I think that looks fantastic.
Lori?
I agree completely.
Tim?
I disagree.
How do you disagree?
When I look at this picture, it shows me a split level where my entrance is, and basically I would look and see that the first floor or the multiple windows would be the living area. Above that would be the bedroom area. I look at it from the standpoint with the palm trees so close. If emergency services had to get to that third floor, there's no way they'd get a ladder to it
Okay.
because of the roof line.
Sarah?
I would note that adding that additional third story does change the requirements for fire protection. So there are additional requirements. I don't remember what they're called exactly, but that would come into effect.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you for that, Tim. Joanne, we know you're a yes.
Yeah, I like it.
Megan?
Yes.
Murphy?
Yes,
Jane?
but with the proviso, mine would be that, that the landscape requirements are strictly adhered to, and that there is a definite set of landscape criteria between the houses that accomplishes what we really wanted to do originally, was the view corridors between.
We do have a fence
And
issue.
fence, because all you have to do is, well, you can already do it on the boulevard, but all you have to do is drive up and down Hickory Island and see how they've closed it all in. And
You wouldn't know the Gulf of Mexico existed.
No.
exactly,
Right.
Yeah.
exactly, and
Can't tell people they can't
So-
fence in a
But,
$4
but,
million
but let's,
house.
okay, but let's talk
no,
about
no,
opacity
no, there's different
then.
kinds of fences.
Let's talk about
different kinds of-
opacity.
there's-
We want to be able to see through it. Jane? She hates
I have a
this.
couple of problems. If this is gonna be required on every single house, we're also gonna have cookie cutter houses that all look exactly the same.
It's not required.
Okay, so
It's an
that's, I'm happy to hear that. And I also agree with Joanne 100% on the slide scale per lot size, because on a 50-foot lot, that base house would be 20 feet wide, and you really can't get a bathroom and a bedroom and a living room all on that same 20 feet.
I just want to touch on that real quick, sorry, Megan. In the next time you bring this forward, could you give us a visual of that, let's
50-foot
call it the
house?
longboat option versus this,
Yes.
hard and fast?
So a light
I'd like to
plane,
I have to see it. Anything, go ahead, Megan.
But Jane, couldn't that be addressed, because she mentioned on it and touched on it, maybe Sarah needs to address it a little bit more, is giving up some of your space on your ground floor gets you up there too. So, I mean,
Well,
there's a little bit more of a carrot available for them that's, would fit them up.
I think that's a fantasy to say that somebody will sign an affidavit saying that nothing will ever go in this space that they're going to give up on the ground level, because there's always gonna be the handicap issue where I have to have this for this, or now we're all going to have they've gotta protect the beautiful cars they have, so they have no space for their, paddle
It's an
paddle
option.
everything.
It's an option.
I know, but I'm saying,
And I
once it's
disagree it's a
built-
fantasy. I disagree completely that it's a
I
fantasy.
think people are gonna take that in a New York
Yeah,
minute.
but even on the
I would-
smaller lots, they still get a somewhat closed in for their cars and for some of that equipment. But if you wanna go up, this is what you gotta do, and I don't think it's a fantasy. I think that at this point,
Well, the
we
fantasy
gotta
is,
quit-
in my
quit
opinion,
thinking
that
this is
it
a
won't get
fantasy.
closed
This
in
can be
later.
done. This can be done, and I don't think that this,
I
it's a
think-
fantasy is.
I think, I love the look but I just don't think that will work on a 50-foot lot if there isn't a scale that
Yeah,
slides.
that's what we need to see.
Yeah.
Jim?
Yeah, I love the concept. I think we have to, particularly on the golf side, if we're really concerned about view corridors, which we should be, because you look at Hickory, the vegetation's out of control. It's completely blocks a view corridor. If you're going to provide this carrot, which I think is a wonderful concept, provide that carrot, and you can't just have opacity, which is so vague. You almost have to maybe limit the height of the vegetation if you choose this option. Has to be something very clear, nothing over a foot, something like that. Otherwise, how things grow, and it's going to get, no one's going to be able to enforce a opacity reg. So maybe a height restriction on that vegetation, because I think this could really be the solution to the whole view corridor issue. So I like it.
Thank you for that, Jim. I agree with you completely. Dan?
I'm fine with that.
Rex?
I like it.
Okay. That's great news. Okay.
So I
Um,
think we'll go back and play with the carrot stick thing, because I know there's a discussion about increased setbacks. And so I think, again, from the concept point, we may start this from a narrower point if you want bigger setbacks, and then you can still have the option. So I think it fits no matter what that number ends up being. And just as a quick 2 cents. Remember, when you're talking about square footage below, you know, a typical two-car garage is about 450 square feet. You're talking about typically we're dealing with 800 square feet plus per unit on this
Mhm.
picture. You're talking 1,600 square feet below. I don't think we have a problem with storage and area
Okay,
for keeping all their cars when you've got basically two-car garages below every unit as it is, and a typical house that we're seeing.
but can we not have a duplex? Can we have like a single-family house? Because I think that's where you'll really see a different
You can do-
deviation.
You can use my 65-foot lot as an example if you want to.
Yeah,
There's
I'd
a
like to see
smaller
what
one,
you
I
build
got
of
some
it.
40s
And
next to me, I can
We
draw.
chose a duplex just because that's what we're seeing so much of, and because that's what we're familiar with along that roadway, which is the biggest issue. And I mean, that's what you see along Hickory Boulevard too, so I
Do
kind
both.
of wanted to give you like a realistic
Thank you,
example
Joanne.
of what it is.
One other question, now we're looking at them this way.
Mhm.
We haven't looked at them from the side now,
Mm-hmm.
okay? So, are they going to, like the third story, it comes in this way, but on the beachfront, is that gonna be straight up the
Yeah.
front?
Is it a true
And
cake?
on all sides,
It's a
And on
true
all
cake
sides.
on
Yes.
all four sides?
yes.
That's all I'm asking, thanks.
And,
So you could have but you could have a railing on the top of the second story, let's
Sure.
say, so that the third story is walk out on the roof of the second story, in other
yes,
words.
but,
Yes.
but balconies and
be so
equipment are not intended to encroach those setbacks.
Very good.
Right, and Sarah,
okay.
what, I
No,
mean,
wait
as
a
far as they look like an example building to my left, you know, where you have like solid wall sort of on the second floor above the
Exactly.
trees, you know, maybe we could address how that looks, you know.
Question, I have a question.
But the other point I wanted to make is this, and that is that, and I've talked to this example with some people, but perhaps not all of you. I mean, some of these big houses are being built not only on Acero Boulevard, but on the side streets.
Sure, of course they are.
And the folks who are in this typical standard house next to some of the larger houses that are being built on the side street, I mean, literally, they're blotting out the sun
Look at Rexanne's house.
from by their neighbor's new construction.
Yeah. So it'd be a
And,
good idea to give us examples, that Roger's bringing up, give us an example on those side streets too.
And this is sort of a side angle so you can see what those walls look like. I
Yep.
mean, it's not completely visible because there's vegetation shown, but, and this is just an example. This is just to show
It's a
massing.
very good example, Sarah. You did a really good job on that. Wait, Jane, Dan had his hand. Did you want to say something, Dan? Okay, Jane, go ahead.
So, tell me if I'm hearing this correctly, is what you're saying that if you wanted to have a porch or a landing on the second story, you would have to make it go inside the house where those two windows are arching, and that's where the porch would be? The porch would not come out over the roof?
That's correct. As it's currently written,
Oh, no.
no additional living space would be permitted to
And all the
encroach the
houses gonna look
setbacks.
exactly the same.
Exactly the same, and they're also gonna be a condominium with no outside space. I mean, it's going to be with no it's gonna be a condominium without a balcony. No
Okay,
outside space
you're
in
gonna
these
have to
houses.
give Sarah a picture of what you're talking about, because
I'll draw one.
because I could see, what Joanne just said was a patio that comes on the Gulf side or wherever. If they want let's say they want a front door patio from those, arched windows, it could come
Like a
out to the
Juliet
edge.
balcony.
Exactly.
It has to be undercover.
It could come out to the edge of the roof line of the base floor. That's what I'm saying. That's what I heard.
Yeah, that's where the wall starts.
As long as it's not undercover.
As long as,
Yeah, it's
It
not-
could just
yeah,
be an
you
open,
couldn't-
nice
you couldn't have
weather,
a-
you can go walk
Right.
out there.
Go out
Right.
onto
Right.
it, but you could have a walking space.
right,
Right. And the same on the next level up, facing the Gulf.
the same
I
thing.
could
Just
walk out, but it won't be covered.
Yes.
Right.
So no
if you're-
covered space on balconies.
If you're choosing this option
Outside the
going
roof
up.
line, inside, you can
Don't
cut it
look at
back
this
in.
in a negative way. This is a positive,
People
very
live
positive
outside
thing.
in Florida.
Well, let them live outside and they can opt for the first option. If they want to opt for the first option, they can, but this gives them an option to do more with their house. This gives a very flexible,
So I just want to caution you that
half
if
the
you
square
allow them
footage.
to build balconies or up to out to the floor below its width,
Mhm.
that's gonna cut back on the openness. So just so be aware of that.
okay.
So can you give a
Not
difference
with an open
on
railing.
this house with a balcony on the front and the back of it so that they're, and what that does to the square footage of the house on that floor?
Well, I don't know that we're gonna be able to draw up all these things. We're pulling samples from.
But we have to have some idea of, because if we're gonna have, a 20 by 10 foot balcony on the back, which would be,
I don't care if they have a balcony or not, that's their
Okay.
decision.
So here-
And they could choose a
Can I make
different
a
designed
suggestion?
house.
Right.
This is
we've-
just one example.
We've discussed this throughout this process with designers. I mean, it's really expensive to do this, frankly. And we're also not designing something real world. We're trying to show you an image. But I think once we get to a point where we have this direction, we need to meet and also deal with and talk to the local designers, the architects and stuff. Many of them are very available and want to be included in this process. They're frankly going to be able to find the holes. So I think they're willing to talk about this. They want creativity. They don't want limitations where everything looks the same. Architects by nature want that, want to have their showpiece. So I think they're along with that. Maybe not the home buyers or the builders necessarily, but they're usually pretty good to work with too. So I think they're going to be part of this process to work through that. I don't know that we can do a design for every single scenario.
Sarah, not only that, but Jane and I have historically had this fight over and over and over again. As a matter, for years we've had this argument. And when was it? It was a month or so ago. I was coming back from Bonita Springs, and I was talking about just this, thinking about just this. And I said to her, "When's the last time you drove down Hickory Boulevard?" And whatever. And I said, "Jane, I want you for just a minute here not to think like a realtor and who your customers are. I want you to think about the town's future." But she can't. And it's a good perspective to have because many people have that. But anyhow, are we finished with this item?
I just want to close with, I think we all agree that not being able to do this creative design doesn't make sense. And doing something with the setbacks and the tiering, we need to push that forward.
Agreed.
So.
You did a great job, Sarah,
You sure
on
did.
this presentation.
You sure did.
and
Thanks.
Jason.
I did want to
Jason,
point
it's
out
hard.
that we made a change to the parapet and to the towers. So the architectural towers, it's now limited to 5 feet above the height limit. So that's going to be,
So
there's
it's
some,
strictly decorative,
yes.
strictly architectural. That's what it was meant to be from the start. Okay,
Just one technical thing, on page 13. On, down, near the bottom of the page, under the new added material of D1, all structures meeting building height regulations, no additional requirements apply. Why even say that? If they meet the regulations,
Just to clarify, just to start off like, this is what is required, and then we're sort of stepping it up with each one so you can, I could remove it. I just put it in there so that you can see that we're not requiring anything if you're meeting our current code, which means you can build a box. It's just gonna be, we're measuring from a different point. But if you want those additional, it was to sort of show the carrots and sticks. You get this if you give that.
You can do what you've always done.
as soon
Yeah.
as somebody
Yeah.
sees one of these houses
Yeah.
built, that's gonna be the trend.
Can I ask one other
That is so
question?
Okay.
attractive.
Page
People who
13,
built the
page
big
14.
boxes are gonna be sorry they built that big.
D, the third story must not
Jane,
begin.
I'm sorry, where are you?
Page 14,
Okay,
the third story must not begin more than 15 feet above the
well,
base flood elevation. That is confusing to me because isn't base flood so you're talking about where the first floor begins, so that it's only 15 feet high, or what are you talking about?
No, the third story. So we've got the garage, which is gonna be the first story. Then we've got our second story, which is the first living floor. And what we're saying is that third story, you need to bring it in, and that can't start any higher than 15 feet above that. And that's so that you're not
So
getting that
above what?
really
Above the garage?
above the base flood
BFE.
elevation, which is typically gonna be the garage.
Okay,
So
so
that would be a
from,
25-foot height. That would be a 10-foot first story. I'm sorry, you could do a 15-foot first story of living space. And then
High
the second
ceilings.
story could in theory start at that 15 foot above the flood.
okay, that's
So
what I
if
was
you're
asking.
limited to 25, then it would be 10 for that third story.
And that's really just so that we don't have a side wall that's taller than 15 feet flat before you have to bring it in.
Right, I
Okay.
think it speaks to that
It sure
Massive.
does.
The box that you have,
Absolutely.
trying to get that.
Okay.
that
Dan,
maximum.
did you have something else?
Yeah, on page 14, the next page, on top of the page, A, B, C, and C, if you would clarify for me, what is the additional, the word additional there throws me there. May not protrude more than 3 feet into the additional required setback.
So the additional required setback is for so you have the base setback, then you have the second story setback, then you have that third story setback. So that's an additional setback, so we're not saying that you can't, we're saying that you can't encroach that required additional setback, not the base setback. So since each layer has its own setback,
Oh, okay, all
If
right.
you had 7.5 on the
yeah,
bottom floor.
it's not,
you
yeah,
got
it's a little
12 and a half
confusing.
on the next, then you'd have, what, 17 and a half?
Yeah,
on the
17
next.
and a half on the
Well,
next.
I think maybe a
So
different
on
word than
that-
additional would be helpful.
On that, basically,
Okay.
it's the roof overhang.
Yeah,
Right.
it's confusing what additional,
Okay.
by saying additional setback.
Got it.
I'll try to come up with a new way.
Yeah.
Anything else,
different way
Dan?
to say that.
Okay.
Dan, anything else? Nope. Okay, it's 1:01. We're gonna take a half-hour to 40-minute break for lunch, and we'll come back and finish this up. So we stand recessed. Ooh.
And you're not entitled to your zoning in
Page
perpetuity.
6.
Right, that's way back.
Does 6 go with
And believe me, I
number
know
2?
because
Or is that just
litigated
part
that
of the
issue all
staff
the way to the US
recommendation?
Supreme Court.
Okay.
I did.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that's all part, the bottom of 5, all the
He'll
way
make
through
it
6
without
are all
my
together
The
there.
Supreme Court.
And then the 7, that's all,
Based on
the
that.
2 that we chose.
Okay, I was a little, I've been walking at night in the evenings.
Okay, if everybody will take their seats. Ms. Heil?
One thing that it seems to be in my situation, whether you will own the owner,
I feel like I need a mint.
that was my situation.
Everybody take your seat, please.
Yeah, as a boss.
I'm about to go, yes, ma'am.
You know, both of you need to watch it.
Yeah. What are you thinking?
Okay.
Since I'm out of
We
town.
need Jason and, Sarah.
And good old, what's your name?
They went out for lunch, I guess.
No, Jason's standing right there. Roxanne, would you tell, oh, here he comes.
Not fast enough. Yeah, step it.
About fish 140.
Did
all right.
we lose Sarah?
For a little bit, yes.
Oh.
She'll be back.
Okay. Okay, so it's 1:38, we're reconvened. And the next item on the agenda is the administrative setback variance. A discussion on how to administrate it. Jason? We're missing Roger.
I was gonna say,
And John, where did he step out to? Okay, well, we'll just have we'll start the discussion and
Sure.
then,
We've talked about this, I think, a little bit, or at least I think we've talked about it at the LPA. Essentially, in a nutshell, staff believes that staff has too much power. So the administrative variance is not it's not well defined. It leaves open-ended, and there's probably been some decisions in the past that have raised some questions among the community, among us, trying to figure out why and what was the justification for it. Now, us being here have to explain those things. So this was kind of a first attempt to dial down a little bit and better define what justification and reasons there are behind any administrative variances,
excellent.
if necessary. I don't know if it goes far enough for the liking. Maybe it doesn't, or maybe it's too far. But again, there's a pro and con to everything, right? So leaving a lot of authority in the staff, sometimes there could be some decisions that are questionable just from not having enough knowledge about the situation or historical knowledge. We'd rather have it very well defined and very marginal in what we're making decisions on, not 20 feet differences between things in a neighborhood, not multiple setbacks. We're trying to avoid creating differences in a neighborhood. That's, I think, the key part.
Megan, you want to start us off with the discussion you guys had?
well, and it goes right along the line of what Jason had said, that we had noticed that, we've all driven up and down the streets, we've seen lots of variances that never showed up in front of the LPA. The question was raised, how is this happening here on the island? How are people getting these variances that are not in line with what, with anything that town council was doing or anything that the LPA was deciding, but we're seeing it all over the island. So we asked to bring this to us so we could take a look at what they can and cannot give variances on and what comes in front of us, what doesn't. And I think a little bit comes down to we've seen some, as administration changes have happened here at the town, we're getting a different reading of what is allowed and not allowed. So we've had some things that have just gone rampant here on the island, and now we're reining them back in. I will say this much about the current town administration: they've been bringing that in front of us a lot more, and they've reined in a lot of just the administrative sign off on anything from setbacks and additions and such of that sort to bringing them in front of us. So they've asked us to define it more in detail as to what they can and cannot administratively sign off on, and we've asked for it. We've also asked for some of the ambiguity taken out of it, of the word discretion taken out of a lot of this, because again, that allows for administration change and it to get out of control again. So that's why we're here, and that's what we have in front of us.
Okay. You want to start, Roxanne? Any comments?
To tell you the truth, I
You
found this.
Rex, grab the microphone, please.
I found it a little confusing because I understood the idea was we were trying to rein in administrative variances, but I didn't really, I thought there would be more to this. And it could just be my ignorance. So I'm gonna pass and let other
Okay.
people make comment and
Okay.
be educated.
Can I point out the highlighted yellow? Not a big fan of the construction error variance, but it is a common thing. What feedback, not to use the Marco Island as example, but the Marco Island example that we were hearing is there's potentially contractors taking advantage of the ability to get those, creeping out 6 inches a foot and then doing it on purpose. I don't know if that's true. There's just some feedback. So that number 4, that's why that's highlighted, is just to come back to that as a specific topic if you want.
Okay. Go ahead, Megan.
If we have got, and I stated this when we first started talking this, if we have many surveys that we have in our building process, how are these errors really happening? And if they are happening, they're intentional. And I wanted it gone. I wanted the error piece gone because and have that come in front of us.
I agree with you.
That if we have that
Joanne
many.
agrees. I agree. Tim, you agree?
I
Lori?
agree with that.
I agree.
Scott?
I agree. I also am befuddled how we get things in front of us that are already built, that already happened, that
That we
it's
don't know
amazing
that they're built.
that we don't know they're built.
Right.
So I don't know how we can put that in there too, but there's got to be some punitive damage for things that are brought before us, and then they go ahead and do it anyways.
Mhm.
And then they ask for forgiveness. I think once you let somebody do that, then everybody else is going to do it.
Mhm.
So I think that's a big issue too that we've seen over the last couple of years.
Oh, longer than that?
Roxanne, you have any comments on that issue?
I guess I would hate to throw the thing out in its entirety, but clamping down on it seems to me a good idea.
Dan?
What's the premise again that we're asked to agree or
The
not
premise
agree on?
is, in other areas, there is a policy, it's on page 40, it's highlighted.
Right.
There's a policy that allows that if this building were constructed and when all was said and done, that wall is 6 inches over where it's supposed to be. I'll give you a real life example, and I don't hesitate to use them. Real life example is that house that was constructed on the beach on Alva Street. Turquoise house there at the north end of the island. I think it was 4 inches, wasn't it, Roger? It might have been before your time too, I think. Let's say it was 4 inches. Well, you've got a house constructed now, and it's 4 inches into our right-of-way. What do? It should never have been built 4 inches into our right-of-way. But what do? And we were left with a decision to make them tear down the house or come up with something, and what we came up with was we got increased, it was made up in the public access that goes down that area. But still, it puts us in a precarious position, especially, as Scott said, once the house is built. And to go to Jason's point, it's being used as an addition rather than an error. So, okay, if I can do 6 inches or 12 inches or 10% or whatever all the way down, it's a substantial increase in their building. Did you follow that?
Well, yeah.
So the question is, do we allow a plus or minus, or is it, this is the line?
Well, and if I can chime in, and is it the staff's responsibility administratively to do that? I mean, right.
Isn't this something inspectors should be catching along the
Well,
line way before we get to the,
So we now have, I
Yeah.
say now, recent years, last couple of years, and we've been diligently following through on this, is they have to do a setback survey during construction. There is still a foundation, there's still walls generally built, but there is during construction,
house.
before they get to the second story, there's a setback survey that has to be done to show that they meet the setbacks. It gets a little complicated when you're talking about decks or the front porches that encroach, and those don't show up yet. So it does get a little complicated, but the footprint of the building should be pretty well determined by this point.
Well, and I was gonna ask with and I remember this from about a year, 18 months ago, where we went through all the surveys that now have to happen for every type of construction here on the island. Does that mitigate some of this potential for error?
I think it helps catch it ahead of time before the full house is constructed, because it was just an as-built before, I believe. And then you get the as-built drawing from the surveyor and it shows a 7-foot setback instead of 7.5. Now we're, in theory, catching it beforehand if they're accurate. But then you do have survey errors, you have other things that could play into that, but at least we're minimizing the potential errors.
Yes, sir.
So is the question whether you want to eliminate administrative variances? Is that what?
No.
On
The
setbacks?
question is, if you have an incident where someone is over the line,
Yeah.
is that Jason and/or Roger's discretion to say, oh, it's only 3 inches, oh, it's only 9 inches, oh, it's only whatever? Or is that something that would come to the town council? Or do we not have a plus or minus room for error at all? And with that, I'm gonna let Roger say what he wanted to add.
All right, so I think the important point is that Jason, since we've been here, is correct that we are now asking for this additional survey. So, and it's really not for us to catch, but it's for the contractor to catch that they're over. The other point I heard is the building inspectors. Building inspectors are not, they're not measuring that dimension. They're checking the construction of the building. And then I guess the last thing the next last thing I'll remind you is we have had 1 or 2 cases where surveys have been doctored. I think those are well documented. And then the last case I'll mention is, since I've been here, if I approved a half a dozen of these, it's been a lot, and it's only because it was like, a 1/10 of an inch or a half an inch or something like that, and it was clearly inadvertent. We're not necessarily asking for permission per se. It's whatever you all want us to do. We're very happy bringing all these cases to LPA and town council so you guys can deal with the constituents directly.
Don't you think there has to be some room for error?
Yes.
I
there-
do.
I mean, there has to be some room for error. I'm thinking about it, there could be a 2-inch mistake. There could be. So,
Roger mentioned that that's not something the inspectors are checking. Is that something we can change, that they do check it?
I personally wouldn't suggest that, solely because I've been in that condition before, and it then shifts the responsibility and liability to the inspectors. And so what happens is the builder feels like they're not responsible anymore. It was your job as the town to verify it, not us to build it correctly. And it gets into a lot of back and forth. And so I think with the survey requirement, that helps. Because again, the inspectors are not surveyors. And so that's the critical part, is where is that legal line, where's that platted line, right? Where is the corner of the pin in the ground, where is all that to measure from? And really, they gotta do 5 or 6 surveys to build anything. Hopefully they have a surveyor ready to go to be able to do this, I would hope. We're encouraging them to do it even earlier, before they pour the foundation, before they pour the slab for the garage, before they do vertical structural, just because, again, once you go vertical, it's expensive.
So what's the allowable limit? Is it 5 inches? Is it 10%?
No, it's
To be
not.
honest with you all, I'm not necessarily in favor of putting them out, because if you put in an amount, it's a tendency to say, oh, if I'm within this amount, I'm okay. I think the position we should take is a pretty hard and fast position that you can come and ask us to agree because it's an honest mistake and it's a very minor thing, and you know, there may be 1 out of 100 chances that we might approve it administratively, but most cases, we're gonna make them come to the LPA and council and pay for their sins.
Ray?
Well, you know, I'm all for having them come in and explain themselves. In other words, the owner should have to be able to answer for what happened. And he does that by way of his contractor. And we may know the owner as a fellow islander here, we may not. But it may have been an honest mistake. Or you may get someone in here and upon cross-examination or asking them questions, you may be able to feel them out a little bit and decide that maybe you had a different motive, you know? So I'm all for tightening it up, and but also having the opportunity to ask a lot of questions of these people. You know, if it's an inch or something like that, I mean, anybody could be off an inch, but you know, if it's a larger amount.
So maybe like Roger says, we don't put a number, we don't put a number in at all. And we just say before issuing granting certificate of occupancy, minor errors in setbacks at the time of construction must be approved by the town manager or his agent or council or whomever.
I guess I'd like a stronger word than minor.
Okay.
In legal world, we use de minimis, meaning really small, so small that it doesn't really mean anything. Because minor can be 10% of.
But but remember what we're saying here is that this is whether or not they can sign off on it or it has to show up in front of the LPA and town council. So by saying, you know, you're not fixing it by saying that, you know, by de minimis, he can go ahead and sign off on it. Again, we're leaving some ambiguity in there that, you know, next administration could say, okay, 10% isn't a major issue. So the question is, do you tighten this up some? Because all we're saying is, can he sign off on it, or does it come in front of us? And when does that happen? So that's what we're trying to decide is, when does it come in front of us, and when is it just a signature fix? So.
And not to confuse the issue, but remember, right now, the way it's written, it applies to all the different setbacks. And I think I've heard, not to put words in his mouth, but Roger talks about who are you impacting with these variances and the setback issue. I think we've talked about side setbacks, potentially. I think you guys review that as more impactful to your neighbors than perhaps a water body setback or a front setback. So there may be some room to play there as far as which setbacks are administrative, which ones absolutely are not, and have to go to the council for recognition.
So maybe a better way of saying it is, if it's under 2 inches of air, then Roger and them can sign off on it when we don't want to see it, because that is truly a construction error. But anything above that needs to come in front of and explain themselves in a greater whole in a public, which is what this is asking.
2, 5, something
So-
small, whatever, yeah.
So less than 2 inches is Roger, go for it, sign off on it. We don't want to see it. That truly is a construction error. If anything above that is probably, it's a big construction error, and now we've got a bigger problem.
2 1/4 inches.
Well,
Bring it on.
you have to pick
Pat
a
it.
line in the sand, and we could all go, what's the difference between 5.25 and 5? I mean, so there has to be where's the line in the sand is what they're asking us.
So you're saying that the idea of de minimis is subjective?
Yes.
You want a
Too
hard
subjective.
number?
I think
I agree.
that we are understanding right now what that means, but again, we're kind of in this boat because there was a different opinion of that with previous people here.
Well, since you're asking for a number, I would say 5 is too much.
Yes,
Yeah, I think
I
five
think
is
So-
great.
2.
So
2 is good.
2 or 3.
3, 2, he's saying that he sees 4, but I don't know.
No, I'm saying that we should have
I like two.
no error, and if it's small enough that I'm comfortable with it, I'll be honest with you, I would sign off on it, unless I'm directed otherwise by the council, but if it, rather than have a specific dimension, if not, I'm just the person who has to go to the council,
Say two.
LPA and council.
That's the Marco Island doesn't have a restriction on the size. And
10%.
On the Marco.
Yeah.
Has 5 inches.
Could we do
Page
something
40.
along the lines of anything under 2 inches is at the discretion
Marco
of
Islands.
the town manager, anything above 2 inches comes in front of pool.
Roxana, Dan, are you hearing that? At 2 inches is cleared. Anything above has to, 2 inches below can be approved by administration. Above 2 comes to LPA and council.
And I would say at the discretion under 2.
Okay,
So
yeah.
they can plead their case to him. How we got here, you know?
And just, again, this section basically requires anybody requesting this to do an application, do a justification, so that is inherently already written into here.
Sure.
Who reviews it and whether they read all that, obviously Roger does.
Sure.
But previous ones maybe not so much.
Jim, you have any comments on this?
No, I think that's a good compromise. I do think, again, if the same contractor keeps coming in with 2-inch or 3-inch ears, then we know there's a bigger problem. But I like the direction we're in.
Okay. Jane?
Of course, I have something to say. I agree with the 2-inch, but my administrative variance concern has been in the past over vacant lots.
Okay, but let's
And-
just stick with this for this, and then we
Okay.
can go to something bigger.
Okay.
Just so we can
come back.
resolve this one issue for
Okay.
Jason. Okay, so are we clear on 2-inch? 2 inches with, what did you say, Megan?
At the
What-
discretion of the town
At the
manager.
discretion of the
Yep.
town manager.
It's
Okay,
not an
Above
automatic.
2 comes to us.
okay.
It's not everybody
Is
gets
the
2
town
inches.
manager comfortable? Are you trying to get rid of the authorization? Are you trying?
No,
He's trying to have it clear.
I'm trying to, I mean, I will tell you that, I've told people to trim this slab. I mean, I think that there was an inherent when I got here, it was like, we tried our best, didn't quite get it right, and we're trying to get everyone to adhere to the plans, and I think the point that Jason made earlier is, we're just out there verifying you built to the building code, whatever. It's the contractor is a licensed contractor, the architect is a licensed architect, the surveyor is a licensed state licensed. These people are supposed to be professionals doing their jobs correctly.
Exactly.
It's not for us, it's not for them to make a mistake and see if we can catch it. So, we want to sort of present hey, do it right, and if it's incidental, a slight overpour or something like that, then, that's fine, but not where it's an intentional, I want to get a full brick on a full paver on my patio, so I made another 2 inches because I didn't want a half a paver at the end of my patio.
Mm-hmm, okay.
How do you even know that there's that it exists?
When they do the survey.
Well, there's not a post-construction survey?
During construction. So they have to do a foundation survey.
Well, during construction.
So what they'll do is they'll generally pour a slab for the garage floor and then start the vertical posts for the second floor, and that's when they're supposed to go out and shoot the footprint and show the setback. Now not everything will be shown. That's generally the principal structure. Porches won't be built yet. Patios, pools won't be done yet. So there's a lot of other stuff that we don't catch until the end. And pools are hard to move, but the principal structure is the most expensive part. So that's the part that we're
We know.
really trying to catch.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea too with 2 inches, because if they go over, they're looking at months and months
Of delays.
especially in the summertime. So you put the onus back on them to get it right the first time.
Okay, so that's pretty clear.
Okay.
All right, let's move on. Jason, what would you like next?
Well, I don't have anything else specific, just what is your flavor for
General
how
feeling
we-
on administrative setbacks.
Yes.
Jane, do you want to go back to your point?
Yes.
Well,
My major concern was on vacant lots,
Jane, talking to the American.
on vacant lots where they are substandard lots where you don't have a clear definition of which is front, back, side, or whatever, and they get to pick their front and back and sides. But then it seems like on those that they get to do this, they also get variations of
Stoops,
reduced
porches.
setbacks on every angle of the property, and that's where I go crazy. And I've seen that done administratively several times and brought it to the attention of many several times. And I was told, they got permits, they got permits. How'd they get permits? How did they not have to come before us? That's what I don't get.
Jason, you want to talk about that?
Are there any
You probably
recent
can't because they're not recent cases.
Yeah.
I can give you a case. The inside corner lot of not Carolina, it starts on Carolina and then turns, I can't think of the word, from right on the inside curve. She has a 9 foot on one side, a 7 foot on another side, a 5 foot on another side, and a 7 foot on another side. And it's totally, not one setback is really,
So keep in mind,
and
I
you have
can't
no clear
I can't
vision.
explain the right-of-way setback, but keep in mind that when you have multiple frontages, street frontages, it changes what your other lot
I
lines
agree.
are, right?
But
It's not
there's-
always a rear.
yeah.
Sometimes you get two sides, it changes those. We have not obviously done, we've seen examples, and I'll give, the one that, if you remember the variances that you did for Anchorage, the two houses, and one was in a V zone, one's in an A zone, if you remember that far back. That originally had an administrative variance for it for all three street frontages, generally to maximize the building footprint. And so when they came in and they changed their plan, we said, no, you can't still use this administrative variance towards and it was a way to kind of clean that up too.
Well, they came in and changed their front after they'd already gotten reduced setbacks all the way around and got another reduction afterwards, a stigo. On a stigo, on the inside curve, you cannot see around the corner, you have no idea if traffic is coming. Around, in 2 corners, you are blind because of the landscaping, and there is no setbacks that meet any criteria.
If you have the address, we can check on it, but I don't believe it was from the last 2 years.
Joanne?
So
It
on
was built
page
in the last
40,
2 years.
number 5, just 2/3 of the way down, this sort of addresses what you're talking about. My specific question is, when you say modified up to 5%, you're not saying 5% of the allowable, you're not saying 5% of the property width, it's 5% of the required setback, correct?
Yeah, I had a question on that.
Because
that
let's say you
too.
have a 65-foot property, it's a 10% setback, that's 6.5 feet. So that 5% is only 5% of 6.5 feet. It's not half of the setback. It's not 5%, which was half of the setback. Do you know what I mean?
It could be either way. I think it was written for this setback, so it's to avoid the 5-foot setbacks. But I see, I understand your confusion.
To me,
Yeah.
I'm just saying 5% of the total required setback, not, because that would be 50% of, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just semantics. I just want to make sure
Yep.
But
that wording is correct, that it's 5% of the total required setback, not cutting in half the setback.
I was going after it in a different state, is how, after our last discussion that we just had on splitting lots, how does it, because we're talking about smaller non-conforming lots like this, how does this, we're taking kind of a hard line stance by letting them have it, but we're saying you still have to conform to code, but now we're saying, okay, wait a minute,
I
because you
agree.
just did that and
Don't give him any
we're giving
leeway.
5%, you got a 5% leeway,
Yeah, I had more trouble with this provision than the preceding.
And frankly, that's one, if we're gonna go to across the board, then I think you get rid of that. If you're gonna go across the board and you're gonna hold to setbacks, you get rid of that. The issue that we were having with 50-foot lots is there's some 50-foot wide lots, which is, some people call it small, but it's a standard lot throughout Southwest Florida now, and especially in tract housing. It's not really substandard, but that lot qualifies for narrower, smaller setbacks because maybe it's not as deep and it doesn't meet the zoning code for minimum lot size. So there's several 50-foot lots out there that people are getting 5-foot setbacks.
Shouldn't be administrative.
And they shouldn't. One, that part we want to fix the 10% of the lot width issue, and this was another way to do that. So
And
we
see,
could do away with it if you're going to apply.
To me, if you have a little lot, you build a little house, like she was saying.
Sure.
It's gonna be a tiny house. If it's a little house, you know what you got. It's gonna be 10% setbacks, and it's 25 feet from here, and da-da-da. And that's all you can build.
you know, there's a place for small houses too.
But
Okay.
I don't like the 10% setback on a 40-foot.
Jane, whatever you're talking about has to be on the record, so hold on one second, we'll come back to you. Go ahead, Lori, sorry.
Yeah, if you've got a 40-foot lot, a 10% setback is, on the side is only 4 feet. That's no good.
So then you should put,
That's what it is existing.
so then you should put a minimum. Or no less than.
Joanne, you keep saying that, and
Yeah.
I'm on a 60-foot lot, and when I put on my shed, I was told I had to be 7.5 feet, not 6 feet.
Well, it's on the waterfront, it's different.
So,
It's
well,
probably-
no, so if you have a
25 feet.
non-conforming lot,
That's a setback from the street.
it doesn't matter if it's by the square footage or width. Generally, it's supposed to be, so it's really lots that are under 50 feet, right? So the idea, I think, was if you have a 45-foot lot, because there's some out there, then you would have a 5-foot setback or 10%, whichever is greater.
Okay,
There
so
isn't a
it's-
separate, there's
it's
not a
50
7.5-foot
It's
setback.
50 feet or under the percentages
Right.
apply to, Joanne. I just wanted to,
But there's 50-foot lots that are getting 5-foot setbacks for their house because the rest of the lot's not big enough. So it might be wide enough, but they're going to 5-foot side setbacks because the square footage is smaller than what the zoning district requires. So they technically count as a non-conforming lot. That's in the regular part of the code. This was specifically for MUDs, but the same concept, that if you're determined to be a MUD and you can be built and you're smaller, then you have a percentage. But I think what we've talked about is getting rid of that component, both for the MUD and for the existing non-conforming lots.
Okay.
Remember, you have non-conforming lots and you have lots that require a MUD. MUDs are also non-conforming lots, but you have multiple levels of non-conforming lots. That's what's confusing about the code.
that's the only thing that's confusing.
That's one of the confusing things about the code. So it sounds like getting rid of it.
Of a percentage, but perhaps with a provision, but in no event less.
Dan, can you grab your microphone?
Oh, I support a setback, at least particularly on the side yard setback of a percentage. But maybe language, but not less than in a given, on lots, on very small or non-conforming lots.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I would prefer if we could move towards getting it, if you have a 40-foot wide lot, here's what your setbacks
Yeah.
are. If you have a 50-foot lot,
Yeah.
this, and 60, 70, we can go out to 1,000 and just say what they are. You know, and then if someone wants to appeal that, there's an avenue for them to appeal that.
Does this 10% that Joanne keeps talking about actually work across the board?
10%.
Yeah,
It's not 10%, that's what I'm saying.
right.
No, but.
That's why I asked the
it's just-
question.
Yeah, it's, 10% is used in some spots, I just use that
So
as an example.
I think in the
I'm
example,
not saying that's what you have to do, I was using it as an example of something you could do.
it's usually going to be 5 feet. So it's 10% or 5 feet. The minimum is 5 feet. So and there may be a case where you have a 60-foot lot that also doesn't meet the zoning requirements for lot size. So then therefore it's a non-conforming lot to the zoning. In that case, the 10% would kick in because it would be a 6-foot setback.
We're only
Well,
talking
I haven't
about
seen
smaller
those. I haven't
lots.
seen those since being here. It's generally the 50 and 45-foot lots. We get it for the 40-foot lots, the few that there are. We were struggling with those that are 50 feet, that is really a standard size for small lots now, getting a discounted setback.
Mhm.
If you're- The debate of the 40 or 30-foot lots or whatever, yeah, we can have that. But we were having a problem with the 50-foot lots also getting
Lori?
a discount.
Did you have something?
Just, if you've got a smaller lot and you're giving a less setback, then you're building more house per square foot,
Yep.
which defeats our whole trying to keep
Mhm.
the house a certain size on the lot.
Mhm.
But could be used in that variation of inserting, because you can't get, to have it more architecturally designed, that's where your slide could help, because your square footage is certainly gonna be a lot smaller if you have to go in 10 feet and on a 50-foot lot more. That's huge. You're gonna have
Yeah.
a 20-foot room.
Right, but I'm thinking of the land rather than the space up.
you still have a lot coverage rule too, that they can't use.
Yes,
you still have some parameters that bring that back into conformity too as well. They cannot, what was it, 40%?
So the question is, non-conforming lots, do you want to allow smaller setbacks? And then, or do you want to limit which ones they are, so below 50, above 50, that discussion, or not at all? That's really what we're.
I guess what I'd say is, I don't like what's here right now.
Okay. I don't know that I do either.
Give us something different.
Well, it goes back to Jason, what would you, what's the recommendation? What would you like?
So,
I mean, what,
so
or,
let me tell you what I think we're gonna do. We're gonna retool this and say, if your lot width is X, your setback, your minimum setback is Y. And we'll do that for each, and if your lot is an inch bigger than that, you go to the next category, and that property setback is that.
Excellent.
And we'll just
Okay.
have a little table that shows what it is.
Yeah.
We'll have one for ones that back up to the water, because that's a little different than versus ones that don't.
Yep.
We'll have two little spreadsheets that show that, and then you can review that and determine if you want to bring it in or make it wider.
Okay, excellent, great idea. Okay, so we're off on that. What's next, Jason? Anything else on that?
Let's see. Similar conversation, number 6, was a allowance for, let's see, where is it? Basically less than 50-foot lots that are elevating their structure to meet base flood, was being able to do an administrative variance for that. There's cases that we've seen where they struggle with being able to move the house. We always encourage, if you're gonna elevate, you're doing all the construction, you might as well try to meet the setbacks the best you can. So that's, I guess, I propose that to you. Do you wanna make them meet the setbacks, or allow some kind of administrative variance to do the best they can, since they are elevating a house?
Well, I don't think you can, the concern there is it's already existing, and they are bringing it into a floodplain, which would be helping the island. So you're not gonna say, okay, cut off this bedroom, or eliminate the kitchen so that you fit in the setback.
I hate to say it, but I agree with Jane. You have an existing situation, and they're remedying one of the problems.
Right.
She was very sensible on that.
Thank you.
And if you don't mind, I'm gonna give an example. If you're aware of my property, and I have a guest house on the street, and it sits 4.5 feet from Estera Boulevard, which is really a problem for Estera Boulevard.
Sure.
But it doesn't, it's not BFE, but it was built a long time ago, so it doesn't meet the setback. I said I would move it back from the street and elevate it to BFE, so it wouldn't be so close to Estera Boulevard, but they wouldn't let me do it, because I didn't wanna move it in. Once I moved it in, I couldn't get my driveway in it anymore. And they said, no, I can't. It would have been an advantage for the community for me to come in and say,
How long ago was that?
about 10 years,
Yeah,
10 years ago.
a short-sighted
Yeah,
conversation.
so it gives you an example that there are times that would benefit the community to
And your guest
have
house
that
definitely
conversation.
would. The other one would be on that property. The property that used to be Alderet's.
Right.
That would be, because there are a lot of those little guest
There are
houses
some.
right on the road.
so this is raising the structure as is not adding another room,
That's right.
is not
Right.
That's right.
changing anything to the
You
structure,
might
but
have
just
to,
lifting up.
But what about raising the structure and moving it, like Joanne said? Like I could see you raising it and almost sort of adjoining it to your house.
And I'm not making the setback worse. I'm making the
You're
setback
just
better,
making the
but
setback
it's
better.
not conforming.
Right.
But the other thing is there might have to be a platform to, if it was on the ground or low enough to the ground, you only had 2 steps. Well, now you have to have 16 steps to get to it. You might have to have a stairway.
What I was
But-
more concerned of is they came in here to get it raised. And oh yeah, by the way, I'm gonna add 2 more stories to it too at the same time. This is an as is, because,
Put it here or here,
but we need to be clear on that.
you're improving all of this.
So what we've done is, because it doesn't allow any of this now,
But
really,
nobody
but what
sticks
we've
it.
done is if you can fit it on your property, you have to fit it, you have to move it over 5 feet, 6 feet, whatever it is, and you have to fit it. This is really gonna be for that narrow case where it's under a 50-foot lot, and like you said, the structure's already there, you can't cut off a bedroom. You're not adding to it, you're not adding 3 more stories.
But
So-
what if it's not an under 50-foot lot? How wide's your lot?
Mine's 65, Alderet's
But this
was
is
probably
about the
80.
administrative
Administrative.
variance, that's why we're talking 50 foot. We're just talking administrative variance.
What we didn't want, which we've been running into, is a 7,200 square foot lot, which is a big lot by our island standards, being able to not have to meet setbacks when they easily can.
Yes.
So the under 50 foot is trying, because you could have a 75-foot wide lot and technically be a non-conforming lot. So under existing code, you potentially wouldn't have to continue to meet the setbacks when you easily could, because you got 25 more feet on the other side of your house.
Mhm.
And if you're lifting it, you might as well just move it. So
Mhm.
that's why you're going to see that. We keep trying to narrow it down to those that are under 50 feet.
Mhm. But it addresses a whole other issue too.
Right. And they have the opportunity to come back to the council and the LPA if they don't
Okay.
meet these criteria.
I'm just going to say, I like the language, that for what it accomplishes. There's a whole bunch of other stuff
Sure.
out there, but this
Yep.
is a narrow thing. I like it. Talking about number 6.
Number 6. Okay, so we like your language.
Mhm.
1 for 3.
Next one.
The other ones are just trying to clean up and, like I said, narrow the focus. Number 3, you'll see the same thing, existing footprint, language. Number 2 is really about allowing for temporary handicap access. We've had that conversation with other issues. But again, limiting it, there's a limitation. Trying to think what else. That's about it. And just directing them in the back page, that 41 is really just saying you have other options. You can go to the public hearing and ask for relief.
D4.
Dan, please take your microphone.
Sorry.
I'm not telling you again next time.
Yes, massa. Yes, a
You
massa.
have to sing.
And page 41, this is, again, just a technical nitpick on part of my, D4,
I have it circled.
applicable fee schedule.
I have it circled, yes, sir.
Strike schedule.
Yes, sir.
They're not submitting a schedule, they're submitting a fee.
Already had it circled for them. I knew he was going to pick it up.
Okay, so I'm just going to go one by one. Roxanne, anything else you want to address in this administrative variance section? No. Scott, anything you found?
No.
Lori?
No.
Tim?
No.
Joanne?
Nope.
Megan? Okay, I'll come back to you.
I would have one thing that, I forget where I read it, it was in one of the other ordinances where that the person that paid a fee for an administrative variance and it was denied, he got a credit for that fee if he then proceeded to file for a
variance?
a regular variance. He got a credit of what he just paid for the fee for the administrative variance, provided he filed within 30 days. I think we should have that provision.
Yeah, I kind of like that provision. It encourages them to go through the process.
Yes.
What do you all think about that? I got a nod from Megan. I got nods over here on this whole side. I've got nods all around. Okay, Jason, there you go. Ray, do you have any other issues in this group?
No, I do not.
How about you, Jane?
Are you talking about page 44 included in
I'm
this?
talking about
Okay.
the whole thing
Okay.
now.
Then, okay, on page 44, number 3, I just want to understand ground level houses cannot have a satellite dish mounted on their roof at any place. Is that correct?
Hold on, where?
That's
Ground, on number 3,
So your house can't have a satellite dish? Oh.
ground mounted.
Oh, no, mine's up.
Not that I'm gonna have one, but. Well, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no way to hide it if you have just a 2-pitch roof. Where can you hide it? It has to be not visible. So, and it has to be 35 feet high.
No, it can't exceed 35 feet.
Oh, wait.
Can't exceed.
Okay, can't exceed, okay.
from the ground level, so standing in the front yard, you can't, I guess.
That's not a change.
Yeah, that's
Right,
the
that's
same.
the way it is.
Yes, but we're just bringing up anything else you have in this section?
So I'm saying a ground level house cannot have one, is that correct?
I think they're talking about the old C-band satellite dishes, not the little DirecTV
I'm just
ones.
asking because it's a satellite dish and
They talk
we've
about
got
the
one on our
size.
house and about everybody, half the people who have ground level houses have satellite dishes for TV.
So, what do you,
She's saying,
2
They're-
meters
they're
is
talking
6
about
feet wide, so I don't think there's very many of those anymore out there.
yeah,
Okay, I'm just
I
saying.
sold a bunch of those in 1987. We're not selling them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, my first reading of it was, you have to do the ground mounted unless you're over 35 feet and have to hide it, right? 'Cause
That's
you've got,
that's
And
a
you've got landscape
10-foot
buffer, number
dish.
5.
right,
I mean, do we need to strike the whole satellite dish thing if?
probably, I mean, again, this section applies to radio antenna and towers, which we deal with on a regular basis
Mhm.
also.
That would make it
I
more
don't think we've done
clear.
the satellite dish side of this in quite a while.
But
Yeah,
that
this-
is what they're called.
so,
We're proposing edits to 6 related to what we were talking about, the administrative variance, but yes,
Radio
since we're in
towers
there, we
and
can
not satellite dishes.
look at cleaning that up.
are you proposing eliminating section 34-1175?
No.
No,
the
Eliminating
satellite dishes.
The satellite, okay,
No, it's got a bunch of other stuff in it
got it,
about
Got
amateur radio.
Right.
okay.
Okay.
Anything else, Jane?
Nope.
Jim, anything for you?
Nothing further, thank you.
Okay. Dan, anything for you?
Well, what is the purpose in 6, on page 44, of saying that an administrative variance may be granted if the applicant demonstrates compliance?
With the administrative variance section.
Well, if he's in compliance, then why do you have to say he? you grant him a
Compliance
variance?
with the criteria in the administrative variance. If they can meet, they can apply for administrative variance under the criteria, whatever may be applicable to the situation. So all these guidelines that we're talking about percentages and all that, I don't think that they would necessarily apply to the satellite dishes, but. So to your point, do we need it? I don't know. I'll rethink that.
Okay.
Anything else, Dan?
Oh, I know why. Because the administrative variance section is not just applicable to setbacks.
Mhm.
It had the administrative setback variance title, but it really included other things. So this was a section that, in theory, could be done as administrative variance. That's why we added the language that you have to meet the administrative variance section. Does that make sense?
Yes,
We're trying to tie them together
good,
without using section numbers, because I
Good
hate
job.
using section numbers.
good job, good job. Anything else from anybody? I just had one note to myself, and it goes back to the part about liens and all of that stuff. I'd like to know what's out there. I know
we want a
you've asked that, and I know Jane has asked that. I think Roxanne, you talked about it at one point in time. So is that something? I know it's not private. Is it something that we could get?
To my knowledge, the way the property files are kept, they're kept individually on each individual property. So that means we have to look at each individual property file to see if the town has filed a lien on it.
Why couldn't it be from the summary of the?
You're not on the
Or the
microphone.
summary, we'll go back through all the minutes, but there's not to my knowledge, there's not a active list of pending liens or place.
We need to have an active list,
Yeah.
and even if it's something that starts now, there just should be some way to say, we have $8,900,063 in active liens. Because it's absolutely, yeah.
There should be a resolution to each hearing that
I
comes before.
Yes,
understand, I'm not saying that the information doesn't exist, I'm just saying
It's
it's
just
not compiled.
not categorized,
And not computerized.
correct.
It's not computerized, it's not compiled, but we can, but, provide that information if you want. It'll take a while, but we gotta start working on it.
Well, I'm just curious if it wouldn't be something, I hate to glom this on someone, but as Kristen is kind of doing all of this research for who's renting their house short-term, maybe it'd be nice to know if there are any liens on that house, on those homes. Or if they have any fines associated. I'm just thinking, somebody who's already looking at properties, just as a
Yeah, well,
suggestion.
I mean, she's the logical person to do the assignment, but again, it would conflict with all the other work she's doing, but we'll figure out a way to address that.
Well,
Okay.
or when people come forward for permits, we talked about this. Do you get a permit when there's an active lien?
Mhm.
Do you resolve whatever? That's
Yeah,
another
well-
opportunity.
I'm sorry.
sorry.
But it sounds like that if it's not computerized and it's not being
No, it's on
looked
a
at, it's not
property
being
by property
collected.
basis, but I think,
It's not being
I
collected.
think the real answer is, rather than carrying these liens on the books for X, Y number of years, is to see if we can find a way to get them paid more timely.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Absolutely. But if we don't know who they are, how can we try to get them paid? I mean, we could offer a 50% reduction on any property that has a, like the IRS does sometimes, when they
Train
say, you know
yourself.
what, if you owe any money, come into us, we're gonna cut it in half. And we could do something like that, just to see who comes forward. But I just think it's information that we are dramatically missing, and I'd like to see, I hate to say this, Roger, I'd like to see it sometime
We don't have
soon.
any problem putting,
Okay, so I'd also like to see, go ahead, Joanne.
No, go ahead.
I'd just like to see us meet again to sort of follow up on this and any other thing that comes up in the near future.
And that being murals.
That's right, we talked about murals today.
We discussed murals today and the difference between signs and murals and whatever, so I think Mr. Herron and you guys will be all working on that hopefully soon. And then,
Can I just elaborate on that?
yes,
So, we made a distinction
list.
between a mural and a sign. To me and to Joanne, I think a mural, this is a mural. It's clearly a sign for Fort Myers Beach, but it's a mural. And so we also talked about possibly having a permit process to actually do a mural. We talked about it not going into residential areas. If you have a moment, if you just go back and listen to that discussion, I think will be helpful in your discussions.
And what do you call
great.
the outside of this building? Is that a mural?
I'd call it a mural.
Okay.
no logos, no wording, no
No.
lettering.
No, you cannot put notes, and you can't have it on your house, so just put that out of your mind.
Well, I'm saying that would be considered a mural.
It could be.
You can't put it on your house?
Joanne?
No.
No lettering except for the artist's signature.
Oh,
There you go,
I missed
there you
that.
go. So it's just an interesting conversation, no.
I heard it on the,
Not
I watched the television and heard it earlier.
I did too.
Very nice of you to punt and punt it to the LPA.
I think it'll be a good dynamic discussion for you to have. You know, because Jane's already talking, why can't I do it on the back of my house?
We
Hey.
gave a list of
There's several
things
that
to give
really
you
look
some.
nice on the back of the houses.
Mhm.
I mean,
They're
Yes,
already in existence.
Yeah,
I
they
said early on, when we talked about, and you probably heard this too, Dan, we talked about design standards, and we backed off of it. And we shouldn't have backed off of it.
Kathleen McCough had a
Okay, good,
design on the back of her house.
all right.
And the second thing was drainage. We talked about elevation of
Yes.
properties. We have these properties, and we're talking about side setbacks and yada yada, but we have these properties that are high, and then they have a small area for a little swale, which really isn't enough, and it's rolling down into the street. Do we need to have them where their eaves drain into some system in their own property, or I don't know, but it's another thing that we
Get rid of
just
your
talked
fill.
about. Huh?
Can we?
Get rid of fill.
I got,
Get rid of the fill.
Another thing that we've been discussing a lot is the vacating of properties that are on canals that have the little strips, how we can handle that on an overall basis as
We-
opposed to each one
we
coming in front
discussed
of it.
that, and it was a consensus on how to handle that.
But it
3 meetings ago,
it
of the
wasn't
town, of the joint session.
accepted. Nothing was,
Well, it's a directive for
no,
them. It's a directive for them how to
yeah,
handle it.
so.
Not by resolution, but by directive.
We have gotten a price, using the Denora, street as a sample, and we're in the process of reporting that to town council to see if, how they would like us to proceed as a
what
starting
is
point.
that ballpark price?
I don't remember the number.
It's about, I would say, 3,500 per lot.
Seems very expensive when it's just gonna be duplicated, kind of.
That's so what that includes is lot survey, legal description, they have to prepare basically exhibits and documents to vacate, because that all has to be recorded. And it's kind of a meets and bounds of the sliver that's behind the house. Every lot's different. If it was parallel, then you could say the rear 2 feet, but they're all different, and each side of the lot line has a different depth. So one side is 3 feet, the other side's 2 feet. So it's about 1/10 of the price if they did it by themselves, probably.
I like, back on the liens thing and the administrative variances and such, can we put in a term in there that if there is a lien on the property, there is no administrative variances given? Can you do something like that? And that kind of tells them to come in front of us and they have to clean this stuff up.
What about purchasing properties with liens on it? That's another issue.
I think if they, I hate to say it, but I'm drawing a hard line on this. They can purchase a property, but if they want to come in for a permit, they're gonna have to satisfy the liens.
But
I know we don't have that now, but I
Are we
think.
still gonna hold the fast rule that there's no negotiations for the new
No,
buyer?
I think there's, well, personally, I think there's an open hole there. Because quite honestly, I'll just tell you, so Roger and John standing there right now, and Roger and I had this discussion. Let's say that a guy comes in and he's bought whatever property he's got, and he's got $500,000 in liens on the house. And he comes in and he says to Roger, I really want to rectify this, I want to do this or whatever, I'll pay $300,000. I'd like to give them the opportunity to negotiate that and say, okay, we'll take it, because
Well, I
what we've
agree,
got right now
but
is
right
zero.
now it's not, yeah,
That's right,
and it's not happening.
yeah. So,
This dovetails into the mayor, the conversation that took place earlier today at the MMP and the council with the draft of the updated code enforcement regulations. We, pursuant to your direction, we will include a provision that says that until the property is brought into compliance being the trigger, no permits are issued. So it's an inducement to the property owner to bring the property into compliance. Your code already says that the property owner is not eligible for reduction in the accrued fine until they bring the property into compliance. So the hope is those two provisions, the existing one and the new one, will work together to induce people to bring the property into compliance.
but it
quicker.
would also be great if we could also give staff, the town manager, town attorney, an opportunity to I know that our rule right now says you buy a property with a lien on it, you're paying that lien and nothing can be done about it. I think that needs to loosen up. Does anybody else agree with me?
Well, we aren't
You
gonna
don't, you
get,
don't agree?
well, they can't, the new buyer cannot bring the house into compliance until he owns it. So he's not gonna buy a property if he knows he can't negotiate something down to be reasonable, because otherwise the property is now so inflated in value because of the lien.
The point is that he should be negotiating that with the seller.
He's doing that with the seller.
If you have the seller, you get it
seller.
cleaned up. Because all we're doing is pushing this down the line. If there's no changes to that building, nothing moves forward for 10, 15 years, it gets bought and
The
sold
seller
again,
can't
it's-
afford to
it sits
fix
on the
it,
books for
then we're
25
gonna
years.
then what do we do?
But they are turning over with the liens on them, and they go
You're-
on and on
you know,
and on.
And this is what kind of burns me a little bit, is that these liens and these issues are because somebody decided to ignore what happened. They do not start off at $250,000. They start off at smaller chunks. And a reasonable property owner is doing their best to mitigate that. Walk in here and see these guys and try their best.
It might not
It
be
is
the
the
owner, it
person
could
who
be their
ignores
developer.
it that gets that high of a
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, I appreciate the comments of the council and all the LPA members, but I'd be remiss if not, I didn't say that this is outside the purview of the LPA. The decision to make changes to the code enforcement ordinance or regulations is a legislative decision.
But John,
vested
we're
by you
sitting
all.
here with them, and I like their
understand.
input.
I understand, and that's perfectly fine.
It helps us make our legislative policy decisions.
So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I just
Yes,
want to
sir.
be clear. John mentioned, compliance, and we have plenty of properties that have gone into compliance but haven't paid their liens. So, your point.
Because they got a permit.
Your point is, what is the next step to enforce resolution of the lien? Is very
You won't get
accurate.
any with them. Right. And that's a big question. So somebody who we don't have the leverage of saying you don't get a permit, they've already done nice things to their house and they still have a $500,000 lien sitting there. What do we do with them? Just let them sit there forever?
No,
Until the next time it sells?
no.
Roxanne, you were leaning.
Foreclose on the lien.
Jim?
I would continue to explore your idea of a tax amnesty or a partial tax amnesty. They've been very effective in other states.
I just threw that out there, but I remember the IRS ads. And the student loans, they did the same thing with that. Call me and tell me that you owe money on your student loan, and we'll make arrangements. Roxanne, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna move to adjourn.
And I was gonna second that.
Okay, there's a motion to adjourn in a second. It's 2:36 PM. Anybody object? The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you to the LPA, so appreciate it.
And we're gonna reschedule. Wait, 1 second. I just want to tell you, this is kind of like an invitation-only event tonight at Fishtail for Sheriff Marcino. But I'd like to extend that invite to all of you.